Our heroine's life began like a typical reincarnation story. She was just an ordinary bookworm who read romantic fantasy, but she died in a car accident and was reborn as a character in a recently read novella. She became a secondary heroine, a luxurious beauty with a fortune. Now her name was Lady Sinclair, her life was going well, she spent huge sums of money. She lived without suspecting anything until one day an absurd accident occurred. And because of this incident, our heroine remembered what happened to her in her past life. In her heart, the noble lady cursed like a true shoemaker, and with good reason. The novella in the world she was reincarnated into was a low-grade romance novel. And also about survival in the post-apocalyptic world, then she made an important decision. Here, all of humanity will either turn into monsters or be destroyed by them. Because she knew the history of this world, she decided to take advantage of it. She had no other choice because she wanted to survive and not become a monster. Even now, she had to fight for her life, and she did not waste time. There was no time to think. It was necessary to save oneself and only then act further. Later, she will build a stronghold that will help protect at least some of them. First of all, she will think about her family and those who were close to her. Initially, her plan was quite simple, but as usually happens, everything went wrong. Soon she was to meet the main character's brother, and then another character. So instead of a measured, quiet life, she will get a bunch of unexpected oddities. By chance, our heroine will be surrounded by the leading characters of this novel. Each of them has their own unique character and will face a dilemma. We'll wonder if they can get along so that everything will be okay in the end. But all this would happen a little later. Now the world she knew was plunging into chaos. Rivers of blood flowed everywhere, drowning the boots of the surviving people. A heart-rending cry for help was heard from somewhere, and people ran in panic. Their faces trembled with horror, and the ominous howls of monsters were heard. Everything was mixed up. But just yesterday, this little town was such a nice place with a big fair. People continued to run frantically. Everything was happening faster than she expected. She didn't have time to react before this maddened crowd simply rushed towards her. Without understanding how, she began to fall to the ground. The madness around her continued. Cursing, she tried to get up, but what she saw next stopped her. Sharp teeth appeared, and one of the people found himself caught between clenched jaws. As crazy as it seemed to her now, it was a strange-looking monster. Many people were killed by monsters, while others turned into them themselves. Having decided that in such a situation there is no point in waiting for one's end, one must act. Our heroine grabbed the axe. It was a weapon that was easier for her to handle. She stared at the creature without blinking, waiting for him to let his guard down. Without missing a beat, she began to mercilessly hack at the monster, blood gushing out. Our heroine smiled bitterly and thought that she wouldn't give in to them so easily. Raising the axe in the green, sticky blood, she realized that she would fight to the end. She had no intention of dying so easily. She had one important matter here. But to explain how it all happened, we have to go back 3 weeks. This edition of the newspaper again featured a photo of Lady Sinclair on the front page. It's not surprising, since she was now the main source of social news. She had a dazzling appearance and was the heiress to an incredible fortune. She brought admiration to all the aristocrats, despite not being a member of a noble family. She was pleased and excited that they were talking and writing about her, and she smiled proudly. Back then, she had no idea what dark clouds were gathering over her future. The maid asked Lady Cherry to wait while she put the bags in the carriage. Our heroine had actually already forgotten that there was no room left in the carriage. Thinking that the luggage was heavy, she first decided to look around to see if there were any strangers. She looked around out of idle curiosity. She was going to help the maid. Having said that she would lift it herself, she took the purchases with one hand and placed them in the carriage. The maid clapped her hands joyfully and said that the mistress was surprisingly strong, adding afterwards that beauty and strength are an incredible combination and that the lady is beautiful. Milady replied that society does not favour strong women, so she hides it. She was weak from childhood, so her parents got hold of a special potion. After several years, she not only recovered, but also became unusually strong. Having loaded all the remaining luggage, our heroine informed the maid that it was time to leave. She felt a chill. A strange sensation came over her, but it quickly passed. The maid noticed her suspicious movements and asked what was going on. As she continued to climb, Lady Cherry wondered if she had imagined the whole thing. That's why she said that it was nothing serious, she was probably just a little dizzy. However, everything changed at that moment. Dizziness still made her stumble. And when she hit her head on the ground, she felt a pain, as if her skull had split in two. She couldn't even manage to squeeze out a stifled groan. It was so unexpected. It was then that her brain was suddenly flooded with memories, as if it had happened yesterday. Memory flashed before her mind's eye in vivid images, and she remembered everything. But it's one thing to remember, and another thing to realize and, most importantly, accept this truth. In the evening, lying in bed, she tried not to pay attention to the physical pain, and although the fall had hit her head quite hard, that was not what was bothering her. The maid sympathetically asked her mistress whether she had regained consciousness and whether she was feeling better. She told me that, as they say, it's just a mild concussion and there's no need to worry. Our heroine replied that she was fine, but thought to herself that she needed to sort this out. But the maid did not want to leave her. She even asked if she should call a doctor, but she refused. Then it suddenly dawned on her, and she asked them to bring all the newspapers they had. Now her memories have returned, and first of all, about who she was before. And what kind of world was this? It was the universe of the book she read in her past life. The novel was called Love in a Destroyed World, and the action took place in a post-apocalyptic setting. A heroine named Aurora gathered men around her in a destroyed world. And gradually, having created a squad of survivors, he begins searching for a cure for the virus. The book said that some survivors created special shelters. The size of these camps was directly related to their impact on the surrounding world. Aurora soon manages to capture them one by one and take all power into her hands. Our heroine's role was to put another character in danger, and later die from a monster bite, like the most useless third-tier heroine. But she had already died in her past life, so she didn't want the same fate in this world. What should she do? Anything could be stopped, but not the end of the world. She thought that running in this case was simply useless, but then it dawned on her again. Having figured that running away would not save her, she thought that she should prepare well. Besides, she had memories of her past life, and therefore she could arrange everything. Susanna advised her to rest, but my lady thought only of the monsters that would appear. Our heroine asked for the newspapers. She needed to understand how much time was left. She decided to establish her shelter, and the newspapers were already writing about the first infected. I read that the largest funeral took place in the Marquis Casey estate. She thought that the lives of many servants had been taken by an evil disease, and that there was less than a month left. This means that there is so little time that it is not enough to collect even the most necessary things. She needed food supplies and funds for preparation, and she had the means for this. She also needed weapons for resistance, and she knew exactly who to entrust with this. She approached the Sinclair family's personal lawyer, Howard Harrison, with the question. He asked her if she was asking him to get her a weapon and why she needed it. Pretending to be innocent, she replied that she suddenly felt she had to defend herself. Howard was devoted to her family, and after her parents' death, he took care of all the affairs. She had been lonely since childhood, so he was like a brother to her and nothing else. He asked her to explain in more detail how exactly she intended to use the weapon. He was interested in what she was up to again, and my lady understood that he couldn't be fooled. Lady Cherry would be only glad if no one had to interfere in her affairs. But if the heiress of the Sinclair family acquires a bunch of weapons at once, it will attract attention. But he always acts cautiously and will be able to acquire everything without any problems. The best way out of the situation is to say that he wants to take the life of one guy. She couldn't tell him that she would only point her weapon at monsters. At that moment, it seemed to her that this was a good enough reason for him to help her. But to her regret, his question left her stumped. He asked who this degenerate was. Looking at his stern face, I thought that I should choose my words more carefully. Howard's care and concern sometimes went beyond the pale, and he would certainly hold an inquiry. To avoid this, she decided to play the broken-hearted lady card. Adding that she did not want to discuss it, she thought that now she would not be questioned. Mr. Harrison replied that he understood everything, but he would talk to that man later. When he asked what types of weapons were needed, she replied that she would need whatever she could find. Then she listed some types, such as axes, swords, and bows and arrows. He replied that he would also find someone who would teach her how to handle all of this. When she started saying she didn't need a teacher, Howard became adamant. She didn't argue, the world was ending anyway, and she wouldn't even have time to study. But thinking that the weapons would need to be stored somewhere, she asked to take care of the weapons store. Mr. Harrison replied that he had already thought about it, but where she wanted to build it. Our heroine would have a ready answer to this question, so she suggested the city of Brunel. Then she asked him if he knew where the town with that name was located. Having said that this place was located not far from the capital, he reached for the maps. After examining the required map, Howard asked why she chose this particular place. Lady Cherry couldn't explain, but she knew that Brunel had been chosen by a heroine named Vanilla. She lived for a whole year in a mansion on the outskirts of this city and prepared. The novella said that food would soon become the most important resource in this world. The main characters often moved precisely because of the lack of food until they solved the problem. One of the male characters did this, but she didn't care one bit. Vanilla's isolated mansion was a true fortress. In the large garden there was a real vegetable garden, and on one side there was a mountain. Self-sufficiency is the key to survival, which is why Milady chose Brunel. She was also a child of farmers in her past life, so she had the necessary knowledge. In 2 years, the main male character will invent a vaccine. All that remains is to wait. Without her, Howard would hardly live to see this moment. She couldn't let that happen. On top of that, she considered him the only member of her family, so this was important. Thinking that in the worst-case scenario they had nothing to lose, she told him the news bluntly. She said that soon the world would fall into an abyss, and an epidemic would turn people into monsters. So she heads to Brunel to prepare for the end of this world. The reaction was predictable enough. Mr. Harrison said she was overtired. If she needs potions or doesn't like the hospital, he can find another one. I also asked if perhaps she just needed some rest, as she had given up everything. To get out of this situation, she added that she had simply had a vivid dream. She didn't want him to think she was talking nonsense because she was depressed. Milady couldn't go to the hospital bed because then she wouldn't have time to prepare. Afterwards, she asked if he would go with her to Brunel, since she didn't know much about weapons. Then he replied that he agreed and would send with her a more knowledgeable person. She protested, explaining that he was the best at sorting out her problems. Howard decided not to argue, but to consider this trip an excursion, and that's where they parted. Our heroine was very pleased with herself because she managed to solve 2 problems at once. Now she needed to withdraw 100 million gold coins from her account. The banker asked her again, because it was quite a large sum even for her account. Smiling, she thought when else she would be able to hold such an impressive sum in her hands. Although the question itself required an answer, I didn't want to spill the beans again. Moreover, she was not at all sure that she would have time to spend them at all. Morton explained that he was shocked that Lady Sinclair was the one withdrawing so much gold. Having said that it was just a formality, he then asked why she needed this money. Oh, come what may, she thought, and said that this money was for the apocalypse. The banker, full of doubts, clarified that perhaps she was being threatened and needed help. He suggested that the reason might be her large losses at the casino. Milady replied that he was mistaken. The funds were needed to open a new business. She knew Morton was referring to the casino she had owned until recently. Many people thought that this place was opened by a carefree girl for fun, but the casino was a source of valuable contacts and information, so everyone flocked there. A little angry, she said that she hadn't been there for a long time and was thinking of selling it. Perhaps he considers her frivolous, since he asks so many questions, as if she were being interrogated. It worked, and the banker, apologizing, said that he would order the sum to be prepared. Soon they brought the money, and our heroine then felt like she was deceiving the bank. On the one hand, she was glad that she could easily withdraw such a large sum. But soon, when the virus rages, money will lose its value. So she had to spend them wisely and prepare for what was to come. She noticed the headline on the front page. It was about a monster on Nothune Street. Morton noted her concern and offered to take the newspaper with her. Our heroine was truly excited by the news that was written about. After all, on the night the article was published, the appearance of monsters was mentioned in the novella for the first time. The woman was lured to Nothune Street with a letter and promised to tell her about her origins. Milady knew that Aurora was adopted by the Lancaster family, but nothing more. Intrigued, she arrives at the address and meets a starving monster. But that was not the main thing in that place, but the fact that this thing was mentioned there for the first time. It was the extremely important herb elfinus, which would play a role later. If eaten, it will act as an antidote, protecting against the effects of one bite. But why this herb has such an effect and why it grows near this building is unknown. They didn't write about this because the novella was abandoned, but my lady thought it was important. Aurora didn't know anything about this effect, so she didn't take it with her, but later she regretted it. In this sense, our heroine had, so to speak, a head start. She knew more. Therefore, in order not to repeat the mistakes of others, she was going there to rip off elfinus. Of course, she really needed this herb, but the possibility of running into a monster was frightening. Moreover, she had only read about this herb. She had never seen it in real life. She had a feeling that everything was unreal, but she had been here before and she had to be on guard. If an infected monster bites a human, that human will become infected and turn into one too. People turned into monsters acquired special traits that were unique to them. But they had a common weakness, very poor eyesight, so they relied on hearing. They also couldn't stand the heat and fire, so our heroine grabbed a Molotov cocktail. And also an axe, but the load was so heavy that my legs were just about to fall off. If a monster appears, she can throw a cocktail at it and finish it off with an axe. Lady Cherry's nerves were on edge. She shied away at the slightest rustle. At first she thought she was seeing a ghost coming towards her, but it was a woman. She had silver hair and amethyst eyes and acted very strangely. She stood outside number 61 Nothune Street and hoped no one had noticed her. And most importantly, she had that very letter. All doubts disappeared. It was Aurora. The main character of this story, it was known that she had lost her memory. Also, at the age of 15, she was adopted by the Ducal House of Lancaster. The Duke and her brother Eden surrounded her with love, but the secret of her birth remained a mystery. Anyone in Aurora's place would have come here too, despite the dangers that lay in wait. At this moment, our heroine was not entirely clear what she was doing at the gate. Maybe he's trying to pick the lock, but it looks a bit amateurish. Cherry knew it was better to wait until she ran into the monster and then break in. But she had no idea how long Aurora could take, so she decided to take action. Her plan was to quickly grab the grass and run away before there was any commotion. The mansion was so quiet, as if everyone had died, but she knew what was going on. The infected had been sitting here for several days, so she stepped very carefully. She needed to get through the entire mansion and come out on the other side into the park. Suddenly, some sound alerted her, and she began to look around in fear. His gaze fell on a small box on the floor, but it was unclear where the noise was coming from. Although our heroine was scared at first because it could have been a monster, she later calmed down. Curiosity got the better of her. She wanted to check this thing. She lit it up. Imagine her surprise when in the light she saw an engraving of the herb elfinus. She expected anything, but not for the grass to fall right at her feet, and she didn't even have to look for it. In the end, she still didn't understand what had happened, but now it was time for her to get out. Taking a cautious step towards the exit, our heroine stopped. Something was happening. The next second, she saw a man and wondered what he could be doing here. Questions arose about where he came from, why he was still alive and not infected. The man asked for help, but Cherry hesitated. There was nothing like that in the novel. Only Aurora was supposed to be in the estate, but our heroine decided to help anyway. She started to ask where he was from, but stopped. The situation was getting out of control. Then she decided to rephrase her question and ask what that creature was on the ceiling. At the last second, I thought that this didn't matter either. The main thing was whether the monster had bitten the man. Her knees began to shake. Then she grabbed the axe in her hand, giving herself courage. Meanwhile, he replied that this monster was sitting tied up in the room and biting him. What nonsense, she thought, and asked out loud if there was anyone else in the house. The answer was no, and that he had not spoken to his sister for a long time, so he came. The burning question remained open. Who managed to tie up this monster in the first place? What happened next did not give Milady time for any kind of reflection. The man was so frightened that he showed no desire to fight. When he ran away, Cherry thought it was for the best, at least he wouldn't be underfoot. His screams could still be heard in the street when she took more dangerous actions. Now there were no obstacles in the form of strangers, and she took out a Molotov cocktail. She was even surprised at how much the blood rushed through her veins. The adrenaline was off the charts. While our heroine was training in survival, Aurora finally gave in to the castle. The Duke had brought her up so well that, without realizing what she was doing, she apologized for the intrusion. Aurora couldn't know that this was completely unnecessary in this situation. A second later, a man rushed past her, shouting as he went, "Save me, monsters!" When the initial shock passed, she looked towards the house and realized that there was someone there. She had her own reason for coming here at such a time, so she began to take a closer look. Meanwhile, something incredible was happening inside. The monster was trying to break out. Fire consumed the monster's flesh, but writhing, it continued its journey straight towards Aurora. She was so amazed by this sight that she stood rooted to the spot in the yard. Very slowly it began to dawn on her that she was facing a real monster. But even this terrible discovery could not move her from her place. She did not move. The situation was getting out of control. Cherry couldn't let that happen. She screamed her name and demanded that she get out of there immediately. Luckily, our heroine arrived in time, and Aurora thanked him for it, crying. She said that if it weren't for her, she doesn't even know what she would do and is even afraid to imagine. At the end, she even called the savior her guardian angel, and Cherry almost choked. Trying to remain incognito, she asked if Aurora had seen the man. She replied that yes, he ran out of the house as if scolded and ran down that alley. Cherry thought that although she had encountered something she had not expected, she had managed to get the grass. Seeing that the crowd of onlookers was growing, she thought it was time to retreat. She didn't want to be discovered, but she couldn't get away. At first, because of the bright light in her eyes, she couldn't see the right one, and then she cursed. It was a policeman. He asked Aurora what she was doing there at such a late hour. Our heroine noted to herself that this hero really was a handsome man, but she pulled herself away. When Aurora asked what her brother was doing here, Cherry realized that he was the heroine's brother. I thought, what does this mean? This man is the older brother, Eden Duncan Lancaster. In the novel, he was the most collected and was also the main male character. And the main thing is that he had antibodies to the virus. It was just luck that she met him. Eden said he was on patrol, and Aurora introduced Cherry as her savior. But if her real name is revealed now, she will spend a lot of time at the station. The officer was going to escort our heroine, but this was not part of her plans. Eden was distracted by another policeman and asked to come over to examine the monster. Looking at the charred corpse, he wondered what the hell had happened here. This made him wonder if that woman could have killed that monster on her own. Seizing the moment, our heroine began to run away. Aurora tried to stop her. And Eden asked to at least tell them the name, but Cherry had no reason to contact them. Seeing that the rescuer was not stopping, the officer rushed after her. As he ran, he loudly demanded that she stop, but the fugitive only quickened her pace. She tried to figure out how it had happened that Eden had started chasing after her. The policeman was quicker and said that he should have stopped when he asked. He added that he was grateful for saving his sister, but she was also an important witness. Cherry thought she ran because he would ask her to take off her mask and say her name. She should have just quietly left so she could continue getting ready. Who would have thought that Eden would, without blinking an eye, abandon her sister and rush after her? The officer said that since she was such a secretive character, he would interrogate her more harshly. Then she thought that at this rate he would soon drag her to the police. They heard screams in the distance and heard words that they had to knock him out. Aurora was still screaming, so the officer was distracted, and Cherry took advantage of the moment. She took off running again, wondering along the way whether he would run now too. After all, it was heard that something had happened to his sister, which meant he needed to return. He had a difficult task before him, and both of these goals were equally important to him. But still, in this situation, Eden decided that his sister was more important, and then noticed the brooch. Cherry didn't run so far that she couldn't see what a mistake she had made. She could have gone so crazy. Why the hell did that brooch come off at such an inopportune time? She asked herself in her heart, what kind of Cinderella is she and how can she steal her now? And then this decoration was important to her because her father gave it to her before his death. She scolded herself with all her might because she had to be such a fool to wear a brooch. She was somewhat consoled by the thought that he would not guess that the jewelry belonged to her. Suzanne distracted me from my thoughts by telling me that I had received a call from Eden Lancaster. She also conveyed that the matter was top secret and he needed to talk in person. She also brought a newspaper and collected her things to join the lady. She was immensely grateful to the maid for agreeing without asking any questions. Even the fact that they might be stuck in Brunel for a long period of time didn't stop Susanna. Our heroine thanked the maid once again and said that she would wait for her there. The girl replied that she would go and tell the officer that her mistress had left the city. Now Cherry could calmly read the newspaper. It reported on the incident. A mysterious incident occurred in the capital on Nothune Street 61. Lady Lancaster had almost fallen victim, and Cherry had noted that Aurora had screamed yesterday. She expected something like this, but the article didn't say a word about monsters. It was silent about them. It's as if someone is deliberately hiding the details of what happened, even though there were a lot of onlookers yesterday. But without concrete evidence, she can't even try to tell people. Such an attempt could end with her simply being declared crazy. After all, even Harrison advised her to see a doctor. Others would not be so polite. I thought that the only one who could help was Marquis Casey, but he is no longer alive. And if he is going to investigate who is behind this and find out the truth, then time is short. Eden Lancaster had a free minute and was reading an article about Lady Sinclair. They wrote there that a rich heiress withdrew 100 million gold coins from the bank. He thought that it was not so uncommon now for heirs to withdraw money. However, it was strange to him why this family too, since they did not need funds. He wondered what she was preparing for so carefully and looked at the brooch again. At that moment, the inspector came up and said that he had already asked to drop this case. Eden replied that he couldn't, since he was one of the first to arrive at the crime scene yesterday. The inspector noted that the officer had read about Lady Sinclair and had even called her personally. Then Eden thought that it might give the impression that he was obsessed with this lady. A senior officer advised me not to interfere in Sinclair's affairs. It would not end well. He also advised him to think about his reputation, since he would soon be promoted to chief. Eden was an amazing man. He gave up his title to serve in the police. The Duke was not very pleased with his son's choice, but he reluctantly agreed. Thanks to his noble family, it was clear to everyone that Eden would not remain an investigator for long. But he didn't join the police for a promotion, so he told the inspector that it wasn't important. And the fact is that the article doesn't say a word about the monster they met here. To which the inspector replied that this was what management ordered and that they simply needed to cover their tracks. Also, shut the mouths of journalists so that they don't cause panic while the investigation is ongoing. The officers continued to examine the crime scene, but Eden suddenly lost interest. In response to the inspector's leading question, he replied that he had received interesting information. A tip has emerged that a large shipment of weapons is being smuggled into the kingdom. And since the inspector is here, he can calmly go away and check this lead. When asked who the informant was, Eden evasively replied that he was going to find out. Meanwhile, our heroine was wondering which route would be best for her to get to Brunel. She didn't like the train, there were too many transfers. That's why she chose to travel by carriage, especially since it shortened the route. It will also be possible to travel via a secret mountain route, avoiding major roads and train stations. and although the ride wasn't very comfortable, she was glad she got there. Cherry almost burst into tears thinking about how hard she had worked to get to this place. However, be that as it may, she greeted the city of her future refuge. After looking around a bit, our heroine came to the conclusion that it was quite beautiful here. The town is tiny, but it has a store, a vegetable stand, a medical center, and a weapons store. There was absolutely everything here for survival, even if you made the whole city a shelter. It would be great to buy it all, but not everything can be bought with money. In the distance, she saw the very castle that she was going to make her camp. Having looked at it, I thought that I wouldn't be surprised if monsters lived there. He looked a bit sinister, and the novel said that Vanilla lived in a house on the outskirts. It was definitely him, although when I read it, I was surprised how a mansion could become a fortress. However, having seen his location in person, I understood why he held out for so long. There was one more thing. Vanilla had already acquired it, so Cherry was thinking of buying it again. Vanilla was late, so our heroine began to worry that something had happened. Eden had other things to worry about, so he tracked down the seller and caught him in an alley. The detainee, of course, pretended that there had been a misunderstanding and demanded an explanation. To this, the investigator responded that, according to the law, civilians are not allowed to purchase weapons. And he was caught making a deal with a merchant from a neighboring kingdom, and that is already smuggling. Eden recalled that there was also talk about weapons being delivered to a small town. In addition, the detainee wanted to escape when he was caught. There are too many coincidences. The man began to say that he knew nothing, that he was just a reseller and nothing more. After swearing harshly, Eden asked him not to lie and decided to try a different way. Softening his tone slightly, he said that he actually knew Harrison was behind the deal. Seeing the reaction, he continued, apparently the weapon had already been purchased on behalf of Lady Sinclair. Eden knew his suspicions were strange, but they were well-founded. Saw Howard secretly meeting with Jose, a black market weapons specialist. He had already followed the latter, and Harrison was unlikely to have acted on his own. Again, when Eden tried to find out directly, the Sinclairs did not cooperate, and the heiress herself suddenly withdrew a large sum of money and departed in an unknown direction. The detainee said that Lady Sinclair was heading to some Brunel today. He doesn't know what kind of city it is, some small one, without even a train station. It was the question of the century. Why would a wealthy lady leave everything and go to the boondocks? But if she really did purchase a large quantity of weapons, then we need to look into it. Eden was meticulous by nature, so he could not ignore this. Cherry read articles about herself, and journalists wondered why she needed such a sum. Another newspaperman wondered where the rich heiress had disappeared to from the city. Someone even wrote a suggestion that she had been kidnapped and would be held for ransom. She thought it was all the same thing, but soon they would have no time to write nonsense. The truth was upsetting that Howard learned about the money from the newspapers and not from her personally. My thoughts returned to the fact that Vanilla was for some reason very late. Across the street she noticed an officer who caught her bored attention. It was clear from everything that he was a handsome man. His nose was straight, his lips were pink and inviting. The hair seemed to be woven from thin golden threads, and this shape suited everything very well. In full dress and buttoned up to the last button, in short, she admired the handsome man. I thought that this was exactly her type, but what was such a man doing in this wilderness? The next second, everything changed because the perfect man turned around. She could see his face. There was no doubt it was Lancaster. Cherry began to mumble incoherently, feeling a mixture of confusion and mild fear. I didn't even have time to pull myself together when he came up to me and apologized for disturbing me. Having informed them that all the seats were taken, he asked if he could sit next to them. The question sounded completely innocent, but not for our heroine. She was worried. She decided that she needed to cast aside all suspicions and play the fool. However, she understood that she was not very good at remaining calm yet. Eden explained his question by saying that he looked around and did not see any free tables. And while this was indeed the case, Lancaster's very appearance was cause for concern. She begged herself to calm down because she still didn't know why he came here. But if he asks about the incident on No Tune Street, he will pretend that he knows nothing. While Eden was placing the order, she had little time to prepare a line of defense. He said in the meantime that he wanted to meet her, but did not expect it to happen here. Having asked if he knew her, she thought that it was a stupid question. He was probably here because of her. Lancaster named her and explained that she was quite a popular person. And it's hard to find a person who hasn't read articles about her on the front pages. Our heroine thought that it would be better if he told her straight out what he wanted from her. Meanwhile, her interlocutor extended his hand and asked permission to introduce himself. Then he introduced himself with his full name and explained that he was a Benton police officer. He was known for his determination and his desire to see things through to completion. For this reason, he was nicknamed Benton's Wild Dog, and now this dog was on her trail. She said out loud that they also often write about him, Eden Duncan Lancaster, in the newspapers. Then they exchanged witty remarks about who was more popular of the two. Eden asked what the lady was doing in the wilderness, and she replied that she was buying a country house. And when she asked how he ended up here, Lancaster said that he was appointed here. Cherry, of course, did not believe that such an officer was sent to serve in this village. Vanilla appeared and asked which of them was going to buy the house on the hill. Cherry announced that it was her, thinking to herself that Vanilla had arrived just in time, because she needed to get rid of Lancaster somehow. The woman introduced herself as Vanilla Eddie Laskin, the former owner of the mansion. She brought the key, and Cherry noted that in reality she was more rigid and cold. Having learned that the documents had already been signed, she concluded that the mansion now belonged to her. Eden intervened, asking why Lady Sinclair needed an abandoned mansion. Then Cherry asked not to advertise her affiliation with the Sinclairs so loudly. Vanilla said that she only cares about money, she is not interested in anything else. When the police representative turned his attention to the woman, Cherry exhaled. When he asked what it was, Vanilla said it was a dead bird, and she was a hunter. Then she explained that they paid well for it, so she shot it to earn money. The lady guessed that Laskin had stayed in the mansion not because of the strong walls. She had excellent survival skills, which meant she was needed in the camp. Unexpectedly, Vanilla said that Brunel was a backwater, and the mansion was on the outskirts. And I wouldn't advise buying this house, but once the deal has taken place, the money won't be returned. Our heroine replied that she understood everything and that she bought the mansion of her own free will. Miss Larkin said that she would be in town for now and could be called if necessary. When she added that it was not free, of course, Lady Sinclair agreed. She really wanted to get this lady, and she asked about home improvement. There were no secret rooms or hidden areas there, but Vanilla didn't know about any. The novel said that the Brunel mansion was perfect for survival. However, there was nothing remarkable in the plans that Miss Larkin gave her. She wondered if it was called special solely because of its location. At the moment, she was very irritated by Eden, who for some reason was following her closely. According to the plot, when it all starts, he should be in the capital near Aurora. The only explanation she thought was that he found out that the brooch belonged to her. Tired of the uncertainty, she asked why exactly he was stalking her. And if he is so interested in this mansion, he could have simply sent his people. He replied that the house on the outskirts fit the description of a secret weapons storage facility. Finally, our heroine realized the true motive for Eden's presence at Brunel. Seeing her reaction, he asked if she had found a good reason not to let him inside. There was no way she could be charged with a serious crime, and she protested. He justified his refusal by saying that he could not visit the house where a single girl lived. His remark that he was a policeman and not just a man was met with indignation. Calling him a pervert, she added that all strangers are lustful animals. After such frank accusations, Eden simply could not help but retreat. And Cherry, calmly and completely alone, reached her new mansion. Now this place will become her permanent home for the next 2 years. The house was big, just as she had imagined, and it was also solid and abandoned. It became clear to her why Miss Larkin had gotten rid of the building so calmly. But she didn't know what our heroine knew, so there was nowhere to retreat. Cherry wondered how she could put things in order here, especially on her own. She told herself that she could handle it and that she would be able to build herself a happy home. She didn't know then that in the future the name Happy Cherry House would go down in history. If she had known about this, she would have given the mansion a completely different name right from the beginning. Referring to the plan, Lady Sinclair walked around her property, noting everything that was necessary. The cure won't be invented for another 2 years, so we need to make this place self-sufficient. I noted to myself that the garden was really big and suitable for planting vegetables. It will also be necessary to build a strong wall to prevent invasion from outside. And although the mansion still left a dull impression, she was pleased with her choice. Suddenly I noticed a note on the plan. There were 2 words, Brunel and No Tune. This seemed strange to her because Brunel was here and No Tune Street was in the capital. Then she decided not to pay attention to it, and if anything happened, she would just ask Vanilla. Our heroine thought that now she had something more important to do than solving puzzles. First, she needed to choose a room for herself to furnish according to her taste. One suited her. She just needed to clean it up and put in some good furniture. She was delighted when she discovered the fireplace, and it seemed that nothing could spoil her mood. However, as she came closer, her heart sank into her heels, and she even froze for a second. Cherry couldn't ignore it and realized that someone was burning something here. She cursed foully when she discovered human bones and remnants of clothing. After digging around more carefully, she realized that it was just an ordinary piece of chalk, although I couldn't completely dismiss my previous assumption about the bones. Moreover, no matter how you looked at it, there was no doubt that there were clothes there. The thought that clothes had been burned in the fireplace made her feel uneasy, and her thoughts were racing. But she wouldn't be Lady Sinclair if she left the cleaning until later, so she got ready. Telling herself that now was not the time to relax, as this was her home now, she began. Having assessed the work, I thought that although it was not perfect, it was already much more comfortable. Before she passed out, she managed to realize that she definitely couldn't handle it alone. She needed to call someone for help, so she decided to call Howard. It turned out that none of the phones were working, so she had to write a letter. She didn't understand why even in the neighboring town there wasn't a single telephone. The thought that survival is a difficult thing came to mind when I heard a child's voice. With a slight lisp, the girl offered to buy flowers and said that she also had a newspaper. Cherry agreed to the fresh press and heard gratitude from her classy aunt. Our heroine wanted to take a short break and just read the news. The articles continued to gossip about her, discussing her unexpected departure. But another piece of news interested her. It spoke of the great Segrave family. There were legends about this family, heroes who protected the world from evil and were the support of humanity. Without realizing it, Cherry said out loud that it would be nice if they existed. After the phrase, "they would get rid of the virus," I heard, does she really believe in fairy tales? Lancaster was next to her again, and she asked what he was doing there. When he replied that he was conducting an investigation, she thought how she could have forgotten. She felt like saying something snide to him when they brought her orange juice. Looking up, she was surprised to see Vanilla and couldn't help but ask. Cherry asked what Miss Larkin was doing there, and she said she was working part-time. Continuing to smile stupidly, Milady wondered if Vanilla was really an aristocrat. The atmosphere became a little tense, and our heroine couldn't understand why this had happened. To change the subject, she asked if Miss Larkin wanted to tell her something. She was reminded about the tip, and Cherry realized that Vanilla was not at all what she thought. But another thought came to her mind: she could ask about that inscription. Having asked for a moment's attention, Lady Sinclair called the woman to her table, and pointing to the fragment she needed, she asked to look at it carefully. She was so engrossed that she didn't notice that Lancaster had also become animated. Our heroine wanted to hear an explanation for this riddle, and she waited for an answer. Miss was silent. Then Cherry said that Brunel was a city, and No Tune was a street in the capital. Vanilla replied that it was her father's handwriting, since she inherited this mansion from him. Information about the mansion would have been useful to her, and she regretted that she could not find out more. The miss assumed that since the inscription was on the building plan, it was connected with the mansion. To which Cherry replied that it still didn't add up, since No Tune was a street in the capital. However, Vanilla said that the mansion on this street also belongs to her family. Our heroine asked what Hagu and Semel meant then, but the Miss didn't know. Then Lancaster intervened in their conversation and said that Hagu was also the name of a street. It's not far from the station in Westmore, he explained, without looking up from his newspaper. Only then did Lady Sinclair realise that Eden had been eavesdropping on the conversation the whole time. Larkin said a little thoughtfully that she also had a mansion in the town of Westmore. Cherry asked if Vanilla might know about the numbers on the plan. She replied that she didn't know, and my lady compared her to a student who was called to the blackboard. She asked out loud if Miss could help her with assistance for cleaning. She explained that she couldn't handle it herself, and Miss said that she would find workers. Looking at Eden, she added that she was better off with those who could keep their mouths shut. Cherry sipped her juice and thought she had wasted her time since the Larkin mansions were listed. She actually had no reason to worry about something like that, but they didn't let her calm down. Eden said that for the sake of investigation, he decided to read what the newspapers wrote about the lady. And I found an interesting article that said she was the worst cricket player. He continued that she had been playing cricket for a long time, so he believed she still had the skills. She asked me to reread the article because it said that she played extremely poorly. She was accepted into the club only because her parents secretly paid a decent amount. But she didn't know about it, so she thought that she was accepted into the club because of her skills. However, if you think about it, the club, like everyone else, needed her famous name. And this no longer surprises her, because people communicate with her mainly for this reason. I thought to myself, if she had the power she has now, it would be cool. For a second, she thought Eden felt ashamed for asking such a stupid question. Then she said that she is often misperceived, for example, accused of smuggling. She continued that it was time for her to go now and wished him luck in his investigation. She wasn't an idiot, and she knew her manipulations wouldn't work on Lancaster. At that moment, she was more concerned with the question of why Harrison hadn't answered yet. So, having learned that the phone at Kent Station had been repaired, she immediately rushed there. The station was old, but my lady noted that it was clean and comfortable. But the main thing was that there was a telephone there, because she was already beside herself with excitement. Now that communication with home was a matter of minutes, she suddenly felt like joking. I mentally imagined my voice, heartbreaking with anxiety. But when the phone was picked up at the other end and she heard a voice, she pulled herself together. Cherry asked the maid why she was late, since she should have arrived already. Suzanne replied that she had to make a change, but would arrive tomorrow after lunch. Afterwards, the maid bombarded her mistress with questions about how she was, how she ate, and so on. Milady was more interested in how things were in the capital and whether anything new had happened. They answered that there was nothing new, but the house was empty after the lady's departure. Smiling, our heroine thought that Suzanne didn't know much about this house. Her parents were constantly busy with business trips and rarely visited the estate. And she, being a young, rich heiress, entertained herself as best she could. Therefore, the estate was more often empty than busy, and will remain so in the future. Our heroine asked Harrison to answer the phone, but unfortunately he was not at home. Then Cherry asked if he had given her anything since she had written the letter. But he did not answer. Then the maid said that they had not received any letters from the mistress. I tried to explain the situation by saying that postmen have been disappearing lately. She explained that they either disappear without a trace or were brutally killed and mutilated. They advised each other to be careful, and Cherry asked me to tell Howard something. She guessed that the murders were committed by a monster, which meant that time was short. And although life here was quiet, the apocalypse was inexorably approaching with each passing hour. Despite Eden's close attention, she focused on her work. Lancaster continued his investigation diligently, with folders containing the latest cases lying on his desk. Having read ghost stories, he thought that was what Lady Sinclair was talking about. There turned out to be quite a lot of such unsolved cases, and he began to study them one by one. The report was about an abandoned mansion in Westmore. It happened last year. Every night someone's screams were heard from there, and they were accompanied by animal howls. The police, who arrived in response to a call from neighbours, searched everything but found nothing. There were 10 calls and 10 people disappeared, then it was called a ghost story. It all seemed oddly similar to the incident on No Tune, but there was still the brooch left. It had initials engraved on it that suspiciously matched Cherry Sinclair's. This girl's personality consists of articles, scandals, and deafening parties. A wealthy heiress who is not without reason considered unworthy of her famous name. She can't even be compared to the brave girl who saved Aurora, although she later escaped. Cherry Sinclair would never have set foot in that dusty, abandoned mansion. Moreover, she is secretly involved in smuggling and is far from being a diligent citizen. But still, the words that she was often misunderstood now surfaced in his memory. Suddenly, Eden caught himself thinking that he too was prejudiced against her. He was interested in the conversation between two people who were discussing the young lady from the abandoned building. It was Cherry who was dragging a bunch of scarecrows. He thought she was just bruised on the head. But he became curious about how things would develop further, so he stopped. My lady paid no attention to the local chatter, but greeted Eden. However, the ladies were interested in what the young lady was dragging out of the abandoned building. In order not to appear impolite, she nevertheless stopped next to the women, cheerfully informing them that he was going to practice chopping off heads on them. She had to add that she was joking, and the scarecrow was for sparrows, of which there were many. Eden thought that she was the fragile capital flower, as they called her in society. The women continued their discussion because this young lady from the abandoned building was a bit strange. Lancaster, breaking into the conversation, asked how often this eccentric woman came to town. They immediately noticed his face and asked if he was the policeman they had sent. Then one replied that yesterday the young lady bought everything in the grocery store. And it's better not to start about her, because today she carried everything out of the department store. They were wondering where she got so much money, since she lives in a huge, dilapidated place on the outskirts. But they quickly switched over and started asking if the police guy had fallen in love. After all, the young lady from the abandoned building is a miracle. What a beauty! And they had never even seen anyone like her. Yes, you can immediately see from her that she has never spent a day of her life worrying. She is a lady, and that's all. He wondered where they got such nicknames from, although in some ways they were right. He had to justify himself because women were already trying to woo him to Lady Sinclair. The ladies didn't back down because he himself was following that young lady from the abandoned building like a little tail. He was saved from this awkward situation by an inspector who also came to Brunel. He said that he went to check what kind of hunters were going to the abandoned house. Eden went on patrol, but heard the woman's words and ran to the young lady. The hunters that Vanilla sent her worked skillfully and very quickly. When they had removed all the junk from the mansion, she asked to repair the wall. Their services were not cheap, but they didn't talk too much, which was to her advantage. She asked to strengthen the wall, make it thicker, stronger, and most importantly, more impregnable. Although she surprised the worker, she still insisted on torch holders outside. Cherry knew that bright light was the monster's weakness, so the light would drive them away from the walls. When she asked how things were going with another request, she was told that it had not been delivered yet. But as soon as they arrive, they will install them within a day and asked her not to worry. She replaced the gates with stone ones so that once they were closed, they could not be broken into from the outside. Our heroine sometimes overpraised herself because with her incredible strength, anything is possible. The construction was completed and everything else was going according to plan. All that was left was to plant the grass. But suddenly, unforeseen circumstances intervened in her carefully crafted plan. The walls of the small police station in the city of Brunel shook with loud indignation. Our heroine was so irritated that she could not contain her emotions. She had already explained to the officer several times that she was planting a medicinal plant. Eden said the fertilizer retailer had filed a complaint and he was obliged to investigate it. Cherry thought he was lying through his teeth and had just found a convenient excuse to throw her behind bars. But she didn't say this, but simply asked what the officer required of her in that case. Lancaster replied that he was asking for cooperation with the investigation, and she was interested in how. The answer was that an expert would arrive soon and would conclude whether the accusations were false. A whole crowd gathered under the windows, and rumors of her arrest spread instantly. People said she was growing drugs, but Cherry thought it was a misunderstanding. At that moment, a pleasant voice was heard, a man asking to let him through. It was an invited consultant, and our heroine wondered who it could be. When she saw the gentleman entering, her eyes widened in surprise. She didn't understand how this one ended up here. It was Knox Cornwall Ludfordshire. In the original novel, he was the second most important love interest. Taking a deep breath, Cherry thought, as best she could, that everything was going according to plan. Knox Ludfordshire was the younger brother of her family's lawyer wife, Harrison, who had died. The Ludfordshire family was famous for changing medicine forever with the invention of anesthesia. Doctors can easily identify drugs, so they are often called upon as experts. But that wasn't what worried her. These two should be sitting around in the capital, and they had come here. Meanwhile, Knox confirmed that elfinus is a medicine that is excellent for restoring strength. When he added that he didn't expect to see this grass here, she wondered where exactly. The women were in full swing discussing the gentleman who had arrived because he was a very famous person. Besides, he was from a rather noble family, but the ladies' attention was noticed. Our heroine thought that the locals would know that the policeman was of higher status. Eden closed the door, and she became worried that they would start interrogating and torturing her now. She knew perfectly well that she was innocent, but Lancaster bowed and asked for forgiveness. This is what she definitely didn't expect. What happened to him, and where did the desire to plant go? I heard a phrase that the expert came to the conclusion that this plant is not a drug. She listened with pleasure to his belated apology, barely hiding her smile. In response, she said that she was used to prejudice towards her, but it was unpleasant. Continuing her speech, she accused him of slandering her without any evidence. The officer apologized for the offense he had caused and added that he had misunderstood her. Thoughts were racing through her head. She could practically smell the scent of great possibilities. Cherry thought of a way for him to make amends, so she said that he should help her. He had no choice but to agree and ask what was required of him. But now that her plans were no longer in danger, she was in no hurry to reveal her cards. Already at the estate, Eden asked her if she wanted him to help her plant the garden. She replied that it wasn't that simple. She was currently rebuilding the castle and was seriously short of hands. And he distracted her, and she wasted a lot of time and now found herself in a difficult situation. If he refused, she threatened that the newspapers would write about how he had detained an innocent man. He had no choice, so he said that since he made a mistake, he was responsible. Cherry jokingly said that it was nice and invited the hard worker to come and work. Lancaster asked in the same tone whether attractive employees were entitled to a bonus. Knox watched their pleasant conversation and felt annoyed that he had been ignored for so long. He even felt a little sad, so he cleared his throat loudly to be noticed. They did indeed pay attention to him, but our heroine was a little upset. How could she completely forget about him, and he apparently followed them from the site? She was carried away by chatting with Eden, and her head was filled with the construction of a happy house. Knox finally had the opportunity, which he did, adding that he was glad to meet him. Cherry responded that she felt the same way, and he then asked her to drop the formal address. He continued that he was curious to know everything about what had happened, but it would be rude to bombard him with questions. He asked her permission to greet him, and she noted the difference between these men. Knox said he would very much like to talk to her and asked for a minute. She had no idea why he had even dragged himself to the mansion, but there was no reason to refuse. However, I thought that since this dance was already going on, maybe I should put Knox to work too. Having told them to follow her, she decided that the main thing was for him to keep his mouth shut. Turning to Eden, she said that he had a lot of things to do today, so he needed to hurry. Knox watched her every action. He continued to form his opinion of her. Meanwhile, Cherry instructed Lancaster to chop wood and clean up the yard. He asked in an almost dying voice how much she was dumping on him. Ludfordshire knew there were many rumours about her, mainly that she was a frivolous heiress. But he didn't believe these rumours. Then in that estate he saw the real Cherry Sinclair. He first met her a few weeks ago, just during the strange events in Westmore. They asked him for expert advice, since this herb was found at crime scenes. It might be a drug because where it is found, some pretty strange things happen. For now, the police have included this in the list of evidence for the investigation, but more needs to be done. Knox then replied that in all cases it was just grass and certainly not a drug. He himself became interested. This herb was connected with mysterious events. He heard that the last place where this herb was sold was a house on Northhewn Street. He was eager to go and check it out for himself, but he didn't notice anything special. Although, if we're going to be picky, it's only that there are a lot of visitors for an abandoned mansion. Knox continued to watch and thought that such actions could also be considered strange. If not suspicious, their behavior indicated that they were trying to escape. What happened next developed in a completely unpredictable way. It was just hell. When he saw the monster tumbling out of the hot building, he was ready to run away. He thought about it for several days after that incident, but there was only one conclusion. Elfinous grass, strange incidents, and now a monster that appeared out of nowhere. Ludforshire was going to Brunel because he had received an invitation from an officer of Lancaster. Knox understood that it was all connected, and even Lady Sinclair finished off the monster with an axe. But Cherry found him suspicious. Unlike Eden, there was something alarming about him. Lancaster may have been stalking her, but it was inevitable since he was a policeman. But Knox was a completely different matter. She decided to behave very carefully with him. While each of the heroes was pondering their thoughts, they reached the mansion. Ludforshire looked around and asked if she really lived in this particular estate. In response, she also asked if my lord thought she could not live in such a place. He answered very evasively that no, he only believed what he saw with his own eyes. She thought this was a very strange answer, as if they had met before. Ignoring her distrustful look, he said that something else was much more important. And then he poured out his question about what brought her to this abode, overshadowed by the shadow of secrets. Without waiting for an answer, he asked another one, why she decided to grow elfinous grass. His interest was clearly underhanded, so she responded to him in a loud whisper. If he wants to leave this place alive, it's better not to ask such questions. Or better yet, stay in the shadows and keep quiet. And for the sake of clarity, she added that she was not joking at all. Realizing that he is talking all sorts of nonsense, in which there is a grain of truth, he needs to be shut up. Knox asked her not to worry, as he knew how to keep his mouth shut and wouldn't blab. Adding, in return, to reveal the secret that keeps her here, hiding from the rest of the world. And he will keep it a secret from Officer Lancaster, and it will remain only between them. It will be better this way, and he also likes it when secrets remain hidden. Casting a suspicious glance at him, I thought that maybe he was a maniac and not who he seemed. When he said it was a joke, she launched into a tirade. What a joke! He doesn't seem sincere. But he insisted that it was a joke, but again asked to reveal the real reason. Cherry replied that this was her entertainment. She was looking for something new. She wanted new experiences. I thought to myself that I blurted out the first thing that came to mind, but it seemed convincing. He said that my lady managed to surprise him with unexpected answers and laughed loudly. She asked if aristocrats considered bragging about money to be bad manners. Wiping away a tear, Knox said that he was different, that his path was not through manners, but through character. Then Eden, who had been standing there for a long time and silently watching their pleasant conversation, spoke up. He said that boring prose was alien to him and asked what they were talking about so cheerfully. Turning at the sound of his voice, she thought that she had now completely forgotten about it. What was happening was driving her crazy. She asked herself why they were all bothering her. But that was not the worst of it. The atmosphere became so tense that she wanted to retreat. Knox said that as long as this man was here, they would hardly be able to continue the conversation. Lancaster asked sharply what they were doing and whether she seemed too close to him. Cherry said that she was the most suspicious because she let the two of them into the house. Eden replied that he was, in fact, a guardian of the law, and Knox said it would be better to appoint a second one. Then she remembered that in the original, these two were on terribly bad terms. They were classmates, but Knox, as the youngest son of an aristocrat, valued noble dignity. Unlike Eden, who was a nobleman of the nobility and didn't care about manners and status. That's why Knox constantly bullied Eden, and he couldn't let such provocations go unfought. Be that as it may, their arguing began to tire her, and she was going to stop them. However, Eden forestalled her, rudely asking her to leave him alone with Mr. Ludforshire. But he picked the wrong one. She replied that she forbade him to make a mess in her house. Then she added that they would talk for a short time, and that the officer could go and look around for now. This was said in such a peremptory tone that Lancaster went to wait outside. Our heroine felt a little awkward, but Knox didn't give her time for moral torment. Thanking her for her understanding, he invited her to sit down and calmly discuss what was of interest. When he asked her what she knew about the elfinous herb, Cherry wondered why she was interested. While delaying her answer, she continued to think that he clearly knew more than he was saying. Our heroine answered with a half-truth, saying that she didn't really know anything, she just found it. The man's eyes were boring into her, she felt awkward, and she regretted that she had sent Eden away. Even though he was a pain in the ass and always looked for a catch, I felt calmer with him. She was already beginning to think that with her strength, she could easily send Knox flying. It's not at all the same as if she wanted to threaten a police officer with her fist. The guest asked her not to worry and that he was actually well disposed towards her. Then Cherry replied that this was precisely what was strange. He was benevolent, but for what reason? He replied that he didn't know what exactly she was planning, but it would be funny to watch. Quickly interrupting him, Cherry replied that she didn't need his help. She could handle it. Knox's voice sounded sincere when he said that assistance would still be useful. Then he asked if she was planning to grow elfinous grass in that prepared field. She replied that everything was correct. She wanted to fertilize the soil and plant seedlings in 2 weeks. With a soft chuckle, Knox spoke again and said that this herb was not such an ordinary plant. He explained that it is difficult to grow, and information about its cultivation is difficult to access. She wondered why. Wasn't it a medicinal herb, or was there some problem? Knox said instructively that elfiness, unlike others, requires special care. When she asked what kind, Ludforshire replied that the grass grows by absorbing insects. More precisely, the roots feed on the juices of insects, especially those of centipedes and spiders. So the roots feed on insects, and she will have to eat what grows on their remains. Unable to bear it, she blushed, fighting against the unpleasant, approaching disgust. Knox laughed, and she thought bitterly about how she would grow this miracle. If she understood correctly, then put dead insects with seeds into the ground and water it. And then add new fertilizer from time to time, and then the plant will grow well. She didn't know how to pass this test. It was necessary, but she didn't want to at all. After laughing, he asked her if this didn't frighten her, and if she didn't want to accept the offered help. When she asked how exactly, he replied that if she allowed it, he would apply his knowledge. He explained that he could take care of the insects and also do some cultivation. Our heroine understood perfectly well that it would be simply stupid to refuse such help. Cherry said that she personally liked it, but still, why did he want to help her? Her answer was that it seemed like it would be fun, and he loved all sorts of fun things. When he added that he could also share his medical knowledge, she agreed. She also said that his abilities are trustworthy, and she is sure it will be exciting. She thought she was taking full advantage of him when he asked her to take charge of the matter. At first, it was unclear how everything would end, but she was glad that everything was settled. Once outside, Cherry began to look for Eden, and finally she saw him. He rolled up the sleeves of his shirt, revealing his pumped-up forearms, and our heroine stared. Her eyes involuntarily slid over his well-built figure and the clear lines of his face. Lancaster asked if the conversation was over, and what they were discussing so cheerfully, the laughter did not subside. His question flew past her ears. She only caught the thought that he was her type. Seeing her reaction, he asked if she was listening to him. Then the sound of his voice brought her back to earth. She thought she had completely forgotten herself and asked, a little inappropriately, what he had been doing. Eden replied that while looking around he noticed some firewood, so he decided to chop it up, and that was it. After thanking him, she said that she had intended to do it herself, but had been detained. Lancaster asked again what she had talked about with Knox. Their laughter could be heard even here. In response, she said that he offered to help her grow plants. Then she added that Knox would be coming here starting tomorrow. He almost jumped from this statement and asked, so he should come tomorrow too. Our heroine didn't quite understand him, so she asked him why she needed him. Then he asked, because it was she who asked him to become an employee, and she could not refuse. She thought it was only for one day, but she asked if he really wanted to help tomorrow too. At parting, they agreed to say goodbye tomorrow, which arrived as it should in the morning. Looking at her work, she thought that much had already been done, but there was still much left to do. She remembered the saying, no matter how much you clean, you still won't have time to get everything done. This mansion was truly enormous. They managed it even with the help of workers. In the process, she remembered more important things to do outside. She sent workers to build a wall and promised a bonus to get them to work faster. Looking up from the wall, she took in the view. It was stunning. Thinking that they were right in saying that money and people are useful things, I asked how things were going. Eden replied that everything would be ready soon and asked where he should put it. The hostess replied that some of it should be brought inside and the rest should be left outside. Looking at Eden, I thought that this meant we would collect everything and bring it inside. He sneered, asking why she needed so much, since it could burn down an entire village. To which she said that there was no need to exaggerate so much, and that there was no need to be so impressionable. She added that how could she forget? Since she had so many things to do, it would be better to go and take care of them. Feeling that she had given him enough time, Cherry thanked him for his efforts. He looked after her and thought that he had made no progress in his investigation. She had similar thoughts. It seemed like he was helping her, trying to find something. She decided to take advantage of it while she could before the end of the world. She thought that Eden didn't have any evidence yet anyway, and stopped. Looking at the open door, she was surprised. This was the room where she saw children's things. But she was sure that she had locked the room after cleaning, so she decided to check. After all, there was no one in the house, and no one could open the door, so she entered the room. Everything was quiet. Then looking around, she thought that perhaps she had imagined it. Cherry couldn't explain the unpleasant feeling, but a chill ran down her spine. It seemed like nothing special, just the wind. Otherwise, she would have thought that she had ended up in the wrong place. Her heart sank, and she remembered that she had noticed something while cleaning. Apparently, a lot of people lived in this mansion, and that was not all. She couldn't shake the feeling that all these people had walked through these rooms just recently. She reflected on the fact that although dust had accumulated, if you look at this rocking chair, here the thought stopped. The inscription read, Saygrave. This name from the legends surfaced again. She thought that they really were legendary heroes and protectors. So it's no surprise that she found this name on children's things. And there she thought about the defenders, so much so that for a second she even thought she could see them. When she came downstairs, she immediately asked if her policeman had finished with the firewood. Eden looked at her with genuine surprise when he replied that he was almost finished. When he asked what it was, she calmly replied that it was children's things from the second floor. At that moment, she was so absorbed in her work that she completely did not notice his reaction. He said he was becoming increasingly curious about what she was going to do with the house. She was about to explain to him that this was actually her mansion, but she didn't have time to finish. Her plan was to remind him that this was her personal vacation home. But instead, Lancaster suddenly grabbed her hand and pulled her sharply towards him. They both fell to the ground, rolling to the side, and a terrible crash was heard from behind. Apparently, a pile of construction materials fell on the spot where they had just been standing. That was the only conclusion she could come to as she tried to catch her breath in Eden's arms. Quietly noting that her heart sank, she asked if the materials were still intact. Wow, what reflexes he has! He's as fast as lightning, Our Lady noted. Lancaster scolded the worker for watching his step and almost swore. Biting his tongue, he glanced at Cherry and said that they almost crippled her. He gave them a good talking to. They should be careful when carrying heavy things. She thought, this is what he is like. It turns out he is only pretending to be humble with her. After all, she had never seen him snap like that, and afterwards she thanked him for saving her. She also felt terribly sorry that she couldn't take him with her. He would have been so useful to her. After making sure she was not injured, Eden announced that he would now return to chopping wood. She opened her mouth but heard Knox teasing Lancaster about his involvement in lumberjacking. Our heroine called him a bastard in her mind because it was clear why Eden was always angry. Cherry was absolutely sure that Lancaster would not leave it like that, and she was absolutely right. He even muttered through his teeth that he asked Knox not to appear in front of him. He replied in the same conciliatory tone that they were both here at the lady's invitation. Cherry intervened, asking Knox a matter-of-fact question about his progress with catching insects. And if he finished, he could leave the house, but Ludfortia decided to continue. At that moment, she thought that the idea of hiding this mansion had failed miserably. She observed a very funny scene. One was chopping wood, the other was catching insects. Suddenly, Lancaster, like a real policeman, advised her to be careful. He explained this by saying that work was going on all around, and trouble could happen at any moment. He surprised her again. He usually glares. But here he is suddenly so kind. Isn't it strange? Eden asked why she was silent, whether she had never been given such advice before. To which she replied, why not? Harrison and Suzanne are constantly worried about her. Thinking about them, she felt bored and wondered if everything had gone smoothly on their way here. And in the Sinclair mansion, Howard dozed off in a chair, and when he woke up, he remembered his problems. Although this haste to fulfill Cherry's request brought him to complete exhaustion, he had to work hard to cover the postman's body and get the letter. In the letter, she asked to say that he obtained the weapon legally and that there was no firearm in it. Further, it was said that if this is so, then he should not send couriers, but deliver the weapons personally. When he read that Eden Lancaster had been sent to Brunel, he became alarmed. Moreover, he had already been told that Benton's mad dog was secretly digging under him. Could it be that Eden realized that Lady Sinclair was behind his back, and that is why he left for Brunel? Harrison didn't care if they took him, but he couldn't let Cherry get involved. He first met Cherry at the age of 15, within the walls of the Royal Academy. He was not destined to get there by right because he had no money. However, the Sinclairs wished to become his patrons and ensured his future. The director of the academy asked Howard to come up and pay her respects to these people. Then he expressed his gratitude and that he would never forget the favor shown to him. It was at that moment that he first heard her voice, which said that you don't talk like that, because such words are useless between relatives, and from now on he is her brother Harrison. Then she said her name and said that she really needed an older brother. On that memorable day, he heard such warm words for the first time and could not forget them. A random phrase from a little girl deprived of the attention of her eternally busy parents. But it was because of these words that he firmly decided that he would never abandon this girl. Cherry was his sister, and they shared something much stronger than blood. And there was not a single day in their life when he regretted this promise of his. But time passed, and one day the happiness was cut short along with the lives of her parents. The Sinclairs died in an accident, and Cherry, their daughter, was left alone. Wanting to drown out her grief, she threw herself into a life of debauchery, and he was her brother. And all he could do was be there and hope that she wouldn't get involved in anything dangerous. He was glad if he could see her happy, but lately it was as if she had been replaced. Cherry suddenly became purposeful, with a sparkle in her eyes, as if she had found the meaning of life. She began to bombard him with strange requests that she had never even thought of before. Well, as the older brother, what else can he do but fulfill them? He knew that if he were to transport the weapons himself, he would have to tighten security measures. Judging by the tone of her letter, the situation has changed dramatically, and the usual measures will not be enough. However, Harrison couldn't figure out where that bastard Jose was still, and in the Imperial Palace, the Crown Prince was busy studying the press. There was a lot of fresh news there, but nothing particularly interested him, and his assistant tried in vain to somehow attract his master's attention. Elderson had studied the prince well and knew that he could hear him perfectly well, but was ignoring him. Finally, the Crown Prince looked up from the newspaper and asked to tell him what was going on. He quickly stated that it concerned the case he had assigned him to investigate. The assistant was devoted with all his heart to the heir to the kingdom of Graydon, Theodore. Thanks to the prince's appearance and talent for diplomacy, he won the trust of many supporters. The crown prince asked if Elderson had been able to find any traces of the two. He replied that according to reports, Sir Eden and Sir Knox were at Brunel. Officer Lancaster was assigned to the police department of this town. Lord Ludforshire went there at Sir Eden's request to carry out a commission. Theodore felt in his gut that this was clearly not just a coincidence and that there was another reason. He asked his assistant to find out more because there was something else behind their actions. Elderson asked permission to ask why the heir was interested in these two. After all, Sir Knox is from a family that is more inclined towards Prince Lloyd, and Sir Eden is from Lancaster. He recalled how the prince spoke about the outbreak of an epidemic on the lands of the Marquis of Casey, and the case was closed too quickly, which seemed suspicious to Theodore at the time. Theodore said that Lloyd, the second prince's influence, has been growing lately, and as the heir to the throne, he must gather as many people as possible to his side. And Eden, whom he knows well, is very different from the Duke of Lancaster, his father. He has an explosive character, but he is a model of morality and incorruptibility. The assistant thought that he would argue. It was not for nothing that Eden was nicknamed the Mad Dog. Theodore ended by saying that, well, he needed to know why they had gone to Brunel. I thought to myself that these two wouldn't have gone to the same location without a good reason. The locals of Brunel could not hide their surprise at the sight of her strength. They had seen a lot in their time, and the men in the city were mostly strong. Our heroine, enjoying the beautiful weather, was pulling a cart loaded with weapons. She didn't pay attention to their idle chatter. They had always discussed her before. But the fact that there was also a full house on the other side of the street piqued her interest. Almost all the female representatives under 60 gathered around Knox. However, she thought, he is a doctor, handsome, charming, so it's not surprising. In the novella, he was a minor character, but his charm was not inferior even to Theodore. She didn't deny his beauty, but there was something disturbing about him, and it bothered her. A familiar voice distracted her from her thoughts. Even without turning her head, she knew who it was. Even his question about how she could explain this did not cause her the slightest surprise. However, Cherry reported that she didn't have a firearm and that she lived alone, so she bought one. But he still got attached and asked what kind of arsenal it was and whether it wasn't too much for self-defense. She thought he was wondering why she needed so much, but she didn't answer and said goodbye. Grabbing her hand, Eden quickly asked if there was nothing to do in the mansion today. Not understanding his intentions, she asked again. Then he suggested that it was firewood or something else. Cherry informed him that yesterday, Sir Eden had single-handedly provided enough firewood for 2 years. He said he could do something else, but she snapped back that she understood where he was going with this. Knox approached, but our heroine foresaw that this could happen and he would show up. He asked if there was any work today, as he had already closed the clinic early. Seeing Eden take out his baton, he protested, "Why do this? He was talking to a lady." In response, Lancaster was rude, and Knox said that the lady herself decides who to talk to. Sadly, thinking that they were bickering again, she decided that it would be better for her to leave. Moreover, she had more than enough work to do at home and had no time to relax. But they followed her, without stopping swearing foully for a minute. It was so jarring to her ears that she was ready to lay all the words she knew on them. However, she restrained herself and said out loud that if they both didn't shut up, she would kick them out. And in general, unlike those grown-up loafers, she is a girl with a lot of things to do. Suddenly, our heroine heard a familiar voice, which she had been waiting for a couple of days. It was Suzanne who finally arrived, and Cherry tearfully asked to be saved from this hell. Rushing towards the maid, she immediately asked if the journey here had been tiring. She replied that everything was just wonderful, but was surprised that this town was so far from the station. But overall, the trip was quite bearable, but the main thing is that from that moment on, they are together. Noticing the men, Suzanne asked about them, but the lady only called them workers. The maid didn't believe it, and Cherry replied that if they were hanging around here, it meant they were working for her. Then she sent Eden to help build the wall and Knox to catch insects. And she and the maid went to bring in things and show the inside of the mansion. The new arrival was silent for a while, then said that the hostess was amazing. Our heroine was even a little surprised and asked why she thought so. She replied that when she saw the mansion, she decided that the house was definitely haunted. Is Miss really going to live here? Cherry explained that there was no time to work on the facade. Suzanne continued that everything inside was completely different and even her room had been furnished. Smiling, the hostess replied that her Suzanne deserved the best conditions. However, their attention was again drawn to the quarrel between the two lords, but Cherry decided not to separate them. She didn't understand at all how such cretins could be made into romantic heroes. Looking at the observation tower, Suzanne assumed that the lady was preparing for war, but Cherry did not develop this theory, saying what kind of war could there be in peacetime. Then she exhaled when the maid relayed Harrison's request to call him. Leaving the unpacking to Suzanne, she ran. The conversation with Howard was important. As we approached the station, our heroine was already furious with the police officer's behavior. After all, when he found out where exactly she was going, he persistently asked to accompany her. Then, halfway through the journey, he explained that not everyone at the police station gives out their phone to just anyone. Having said that she was tired of listening to his prohibitions, she added that in Benton she was allowed to make a call. He stopped with a sullen look and said that it was probably because she was Sinclair. She cursed inwardly, but she was still the heir to the Sinclair family. That's why I pointed this fact out to Eden. Lancaster didn't have time to think of how to refuse. The inspector, seeing such a noble person, immediately asked what she needed. Eden answered for her, explaining that the lady wished to use the local telephone. The inspector's answer was disarming. He said that locals were constantly calling from the station. Raising a completely innocent gaze to Lancaster, she asked, "So you don't mind, officer?" He had nowhere else to go, so he replied that since the elder had given him permission, he should call. He mumbled, however, that according to the rules, private calls from a work phone are prohibited. Our heroine couldn't even imagine that there would be such difficulties because of one call. Then she quickly said that Suzanne had already arrived and asked when he would arrive. Harrison replied that he had to wait and would only be able to leave in 4 days. Hearing that she was upset, he asked her not to worry, but just to wait. And when he arrives, he will be able to appreciate the furnishings of the mansion, which she boasted about so much. Laughing, she said, "What other assessment? She's not a child anymore." Afterwards, he seriously added that they would need to talk again about the money she withdrew. And taking into account the person she mentioned in the letter, not everything is so simple. And this request will be difficult to fulfill. Don't tease a mad dog. This is what he means by the fact that she asked to try to send Lancaster back to the capital. That's why she asked me not to worry, because if it doesn't work out, she will understand everything. She foresaw this outcome and then asked Harrison to be careful too. She answered his question that no one else came to see her except Suzanne. Now all she had to do was wait for Harrison to get to Brunel in person. She felt better, but only for a second, because Eden pounced on her with a question. He was curious to see if this lawyer Howard would actually come to Brunel. When she asked him why it bothered him, he replied that he simply became curious. Then she advised him to spare her family from his excessive attention in the future. And asking him to remember for the future that asking about personal matters is bad form, she left. Thinking that I had made a mistake again, I remembered my family and my sister Aurora, who has not forgotten his promise to find her savior and still has not fulfilled it. She threw a real tantrum because Eden didn't find out anything at all. And he still doesn't write or call, but she so wants to express her gratitude to that girl. The maid explained that the gentleman apparently could not because of his transfer to Brunel. When the mistress asked where it was, the maid said that it was some kind of backwater. When Aurora learned that there wasn't even a station there, she thought she had never understood her brother. Then she said that in that case she too should go to that city. Aurora asked that she was not allowed to take a step out of the house and was not allowed to leave the mansion. The Duke replied that the times were turbulent, so he asked him to put aside any thoughts of a walk. She was even a little indignant because her adult daughter was being locked in her own house. And she asked how her brother was, and her father replied that he had been transferred to the station in Brunel. She looked surprised as if she didn't know where Eden was, saying that's why he disappeared from sight. Lancaster Sr. asked if she knew the reason for her brother's disobedience. Aurora knew that the Duke always watched her reaction to his words closely, so she answered completely innocently, but wasn't Eden always a rebel? And it was completely unexpected on his part to show concern for his son, which is not in his character. Since she was right, he sighed and said that it was probably true. He added later that he should have stopped these antics already, since he was no longer a child. And that Eden is a grown man, she gasped and said, "Is her father really that worried?" Adding that there is a simple way to fix everything, you need to stop controlling Eden. She asked her father to leave his ideas about her brother and not to desire much. She added that the Duke was risking siding with evil and asked him to be careful. Having stated that his children had grown up like that, he repeated his request not to leave the estate. Having replied that she obeyed, she began to think about how she could slip away to Brunel without his knowledge. After she left, he suddenly felt the need to drink to calm down. There were 12 days left until the end of the world, and her house began to look like something decent. As a reward for her efforts, she received a whole bunch of nicknames, some of which have not yet stuck. She thought the crazy woman from the wreck was too much, but Knox distracted her from her thoughts. He asked her not to get distracted, and Cherry admitted that she really hated studying. He retorted, because she herself had stormed the hospital since the morning to get him to agree. Well, how could she explain to him that everything would soon come to an end, and he needed to at least know something? True, Knox praised her, saying that he hadn't even thought about it, but she grasps everything on the fly. She thought that the answer that there were memories from a past life would hardly work. Still, he wondered why she was interested in this. It wasn't just because of the grass, and looking at her now, he begins to understand Lancaster's suspicions about her. On top of that, she is strange, and the first woman who has not fallen under the spell of his charm. He said this with such a completely calm face, as if they were discussing the weather. The thought flashed through her head that he was doing it on purpose, and she almost fell for it. Then, smiling, he suggested moving on to practicing first aid on a mannequin. He promised to teach me how to treat wounds, but that will hardly be necessary, since he will be nearby. Very intrigued, Cherry said. How interesting, and asked what would be required of her. Lodforcia didn't hear the irony in her voice and asked her to hold the mannequin's legs. Having miscalculated her strength and damaged the inventory, she asked if they had always been fragile. He replied that no, and that they were expensive and sturdy mannequins, and she promised to buy new ones. Suddenly she said, "Rest in peace, my dear friend, and a better world to you." Knox couldn't help but laugh out loud and said that she was a unique person. The lesson was useful. Now she knew how to provide first aid. And just as she was thinking about this, her attention was drawn to a screaming headline in the newspaper. Looking closer, she read that a terrible massacre had taken place at the Casey estate. It seems it has begun. This was not just a murder, but a signal of the spread of the virus. She did not have long to enjoy this serene view of the village and peaceful days. She had thoughts of saving everyone, but then she realized that this was impossible in principle. She was distracted from these sad thoughts by the farmer, who said that he had brought what they had agreed on. But he explained that they were outside the city because he simply couldn't get there alone. He hired a porter, but he got injured, and he came to ask if he could give him someone to help. Eden came up and immediately responded and said that he would be happy to help. Cherry cursed to herself again. He was like a jack-in-the-box, and he scared the farmer too. Eden, not noticing the lady's displeasure, asked what kind of load he would have to carry. The farmer quickly turned his gaze to our heroine and, hesitating, answered, "Chickens." She rubbed her nose in embarrassment. Chicken is an extremely useful product for survival. And she repeated the farmer's words. The cargo was chickens. She was amused because Eden was in trouble. She was amused by this situation. He, like a policeman, wanted to catch her red-handed. But today, I just sat in a puddle and dragged myself to the happy house with a dissatisfied look. The The farmer also had no idea why the policeman had suddenly become a porter. Looking at her, Eden said what kind of weird thing she was going to do this time. Cherry responded indignantly, saying that after such speeches they might think she was crazy. Unperturbed, he corrected her by saying that she was maddening and that everything just looked funny. He seemed to really think so, so she thought he was strange himself. Then the farmer interrupted and asked her she was supposedly an aristocrat and why she needed chickens. She replied that it was her dream and that chickens were wonderful as pets. There was a moment of silence as the men looked at her, speechless. Our heroine reported that they were there and that she could use some help in the chicken coop. Suddenly, Eden said that it was important to him to make sure that she was not pretending to be Lady Sinclair. I asked later if maybe she was secretly carrying out her will, pretending to be Cherry. He continued by saying that the lady herself was not so physically fit. She asked me not to talk nonsense and honestly said that her strength was due to the herbs she drank as a child. But this is not welcomed in high society, so she always hid it. And Eden said that she had always strived to look like a true aristocrat. They didn't finish speaking because Suzanne brought some things that were in the house. The maid explained that she saw how the master was pestering the mistress, and that's why she brought it. Our heroine was once again convinced that she had not a maid, but an angel. Having said that she would look now, she grabbed the suitcase, which turned out to be heavy. The contents were important, but she didn't want Eden to see them. At that moment, a scream was heard somewhere in the garden, or rather, the noise came from the direction of the gate. She and Lancaster exchanged silent glances, and a thought flashed through Cherry's mind. The cry sounded familiar to her, and she thought she would need a weapon. But since he had already started running, she quickly grabbed the cricket bat and ran. As they ran, they took turns asking what the hell had happened, what was going on here. What they saw was simply terrible. The farmer was lying on the ground near the gate. Behind the farmer, a monster was visible. It was covered with wool and at least 2 meters tall. Nearby, Cherry heard Eden curse and then say what the hell that was. Her brain refused to work. How could this appear here? It was not time for this yet. Something else was more important to her now. She couldn't allow anyone to get hurt. There was no time for reflection. She did not listen to his warnings. Our heroine knew that she was stronger than Eden, and she had already fought him once. She found herself ahead and rushed at the monster, which was already approaching the farmer. The main thing was that she was a monster, especially since she had a more powerful weapon in her hands than usual. Swinging with all her might, she struck the monster, which had already opened its mouth. With a dull sound, the monster flew far away and crashed into a tree. She frowned. For a couple of seconds, everyone froze. Nothing could be seen because of the dust that rose up. As she lay down, Cherry could see the monster writhing in the bushes. Luckily, the bat Suzanne had grabbed was made of iron and held up. She thought that this time the monster had escaped and been defeated, albeit with difficulty. At that moment, she looked at Eden. He looked at her with some surprise. His face demanded an explanation of what had happened, so she spoke casually. And trying to hide the true state of affairs, she said, "What a surprise." She didn't know there were bears here, but then she saw Eden's desperate look. She literally immediately heard his warning to be careful. She wondered if her end would really be so prosaic and inglorious. Our heroine was too distracted by her thoughts. Fortunately, a shot rang out. Taken by surprise, she swung the bat again, but it was no longer necessary. Wondering where the shot came from, she noticed the former owner of the mansion. Vanilla shouted out a question asking if they were okay, holding a gun in her hands. Without answering him, Cherry asked what had brought Miss Ruskin here. She replied that she had gone hunting, and when she saw a bear, she followed him and came here. Vanilla added that if it really is a wild animal, then you can make money. Thanks to Miss Ruskin, they were able to deal with the monster faster than expected. Then he looked at the muttering farmer, who was still sitting on the ground. Cherry thought that soon the whole world would be teeming with such creatures, and she was not ready yet. The farmer began to groan in pain, and then Eden asked sympathetically if everything was okay. Extending his hand, he began to say that in all cases it is necessary to see a doctor. But Cherry stopped him from doing this because she wasn't exactly sure whether the farmer was infected. She still couldn't reveal the whole truth, so she asked to stop. The thought was pounding in my head that if the farmer had been bitten, he might soon begin to mutate. She needed to buy herself some time, so she grabbed Eden's sleeve tightly. She clutched the bat with her other hand, and Lancaster asked why she was acting like that. He added that he didn't know what was driving her, but he demanded that she let him go immediately. He needed to take care of the farmer, so she said she would call for help herself. She added that there was no need to intervene personally, and he thought this was utter nonsense. Not understanding why he was so stubborn, she shouted that they couldn't help. She was even thinking about stunning Eden and carrying him away when she heard groans. Vanilla said that was enough, and she herself would take the victim to the doctor. This option also did not suit Cherry, and she tried to stop Miss. Ruskin replied that she thought better of Sinclair and was really so afraid that he was contagious. Our heroine asked not to move, saying that something was wrong with that man. Vanilla replied that it was even more necessary to go to the infirmary, but everyone was stopped by the maid's voice. All eyes turned to the growling farmer as he rose slowly and writhing. Cherry cursed under her breath, thinking that this was what it was all leading to after all. His face was still human, but his whole body was curved in a strange way. Vanilla spoke in confusion. She wanted to understand what was happening to him. Pushing Eden away from the infected, our heroine braced herself internally. There was no time to panic. Now was the time. The farmer had not yet fully turned around. And before Eden could stop her, she swung the cricket bat again. She had to kill right now. There would be no other chance. She struck with all her might. There was a dull sound, but the skull turned out to be strong and withstood the blow. She needed to get this over with as quickly as possible, so she swung again. At that moment, Eden fired, and the monster, who had recently been a farmer, died. Everyone was in a daze. The living gradually came to their senses and silently looked at each other. Unexpectedly, Vanilla said that this monster was once a human. This means that the creature she killed earlier was also once different. Everyone looked at Cherry again, but she only asked that they light a fire and burn the remains. Standing by the fire, Eden asked in a calm tone. She knew this would happen. Of course she knew, but she couldn't say it, so she continued to deny it. Ruskin said it was hard to believe, since Milady had previously asked not to come close. Cherry explained that she simply felt that something was wrong with the man, and she took precautions. Then Vanilla apologized for getting angry. Having said it was nothing, Sinclair added that her behavior in the situation was suspicious. When she said she wasn't the only one who had acted strange, everyone fell silent. After considering her words, Eden apologized for failing to fulfill his duties as a police officer. To smooth things over, she said that she had acted at random out of fear. After a short silence, Vanilla asked what kind of creatures they were. There was no answer, and all eyes turned to the fire where the monsters were burning out. Cherry quietly said she didn't know, and thought about Suzanne and the bag she had brought. After all, if it hadn't been for the beat, if it hadn't been for her time to stop Eden and Vanilla, things would have been different. Now, perhaps, one of them would be burning in this fire, and she must not let her guard down. Smiling bitterly at these thoughts, I thought that I should grow balls of steel. The crackling of firewood and the disgusting smell of burning monster bodies filled the air. Eden, frowning, began to say that he thought he had seen something like this once before. Pretending not to know anything about it, Cherry asked where he had seen it before. He replied that in the case, on Nothune Street 61, he had seen something similar. Fortunately, there were no human casualties. The creature died before it could kill. Vanilla asked in surprise how she died earlier. Was she killed by the police? Lancaster replied thoughtfully that a certain girl had dealt with the monster alone. He added that the brooch belonged to her, but he could not see the girl's face. But thinking about it now, he thinks that she could shed some light on what was going on. Our heroine noted to herself that he was quick-witted, and Vanilla glanced at the initials. Miss Ruskin, without hiding her curiosity, said that they were the same as Cherry's. And Sinclair, smiling, replied that there were many people in the world with similar initials. Vanilla said that it was not about that, but about the address. For some reason it seemed familiar to her. When asked if she might have read about this in the press, Ruskin answered negatively. Having said that, recently they have been writing mainly about the scandal associated with their couple, and that they and Sir Eden had run away to Brunel for love, then they protested. Then Cherry wondered where this came from, in what scandal. She was curious who in this hole, where no one knew them, could report them. Having met Knox, she answered his question that she was going to meet someone. Thinking that he might have sold the information, I asked, but he replied that he didn't share secrets. And if it were him, he would not be able to continue to be alone with her so easily. Once that was settled, Knox asked which station she was going to. Then, somewhat unexpectedly for her, he added that it was good that at least the trains were running. Cherry was excited because Harrison was supposed to arrive, and she was really looking forward to him. Having been sitting at the station for more than an hour, she began to replay the conversation over and over again. Our heroine understood that something was wrong, but Knox was not talking about that. When they met, she asked him what he meant by the trains running normally. Ludforshire then replied to her that he had heard that the road from Westmoor Station was closed, and people who were travelling to the capital in carts were forced to turn back. He couldn't answer her question about the reason because he himself didn't know for sure. Thanking Knox for the warning, Lady Sinclair hurried to the station. She felt uneasy because there were only 10 days left until the end of the world. She also had some kind of oppressive premonition that wouldn't let go. She couldn't calm down. And what Vanilla said was confirmed. The headlines were full of stories about her and Eden. There was no mention of monsters or of a blocked road in Westmoor. Instead, she was reported to be living in a remote town with Eden Lancaster. It all looked to her as if someone was deliberately trying to hush up the matter. She hoped to find out what was going on in Westmoor from Harrison when he arrived. But no matter how much she waited, he never showed up until the very end of the train's journey. Cherry left the station only when they started closing it down, but she never made it. This was becoming more and more worrying because Harrison wouldn't show up without a reason. Trying to guess what could have happened, she heard noise and hubbub in the streets. The driver reported that something seemed to have happened and suggested turning back. Thinking that the maid was waiting and would be worried, she decided to continue on her way. However, excitement overwhelmed her again, and she did not understand why this was happening. But everything became clear pretty quickly, and the hopes for 10 days were dashed overnight. Almost immediately she stepped into a puddle of blood, and there was an unpleasant squelch under the heel of her shoe. All around, terrible animal roars could be heard, drowning out the chaos of human screams. Before her eyes appeared Brunel, transformed into a real battlefield. But only yesterday the bustle of a fair day reigned here, and everything was filled with life. In a daze, she realized that the inevitable day of judgment had arrived. A piercing female scream cut through her ears, and she saw people running away. She cursed again. Everything happened 10 days earlier than in the original. In such circumstances, even the police won't help. The number of infected will only increase. Cherry knew that if this continued, Brunel would be devoured by the monsters in the blink of an eye. And if these creatures keep coming, she won't be able to get to the mansion. She needs to get out of here. She heard a familiar voice commanding her not to do this, but to leave. Sinclair had foreseen that Eden might find herself in the thick of it, but not so recklessly. He sacrifices himself without a shadow of a doubt, not knowing that the whole world depends on him. While she understood his feelings, she still couldn't let him die like this today. The future fate of all humanity now depended on the antibodies in his body. Therefore, if he died, the whole world would fall, and the burden of responsibility fell on her shoulders. She decided that she wouldn't stand there and just watch this. Now wasn't the time for that. Right before Lancaster's eyes, our heroine tore the monster into pieces. For a moment she froze in place, her entire face splattered with green blood. The adrenaline was pumping, her heart was beating wildly, but she clutched the axe again. To her it was just a creature that created too many problems. Eden hurried towards her, asking as he ran if she was hurt, and Cherry just grinned. Was now the time to be interested in her injuries? There was much more at stake. Sinclair asked him to leave with her, but he seemed not to hear her words. She got angry and said that couldn't he see that the creatures were the same as they were then? That there was no point in staying, it was useless, to which Eden replied that he also understood. But perhaps there are still survivors left in the city, and he simply has no right to leave them. However, she was aware of this even without this, but she had no time for pointless arguments. She felt bad about having to do this, but she had no other choice. She hit Eden on the back of the head, knocking him out, and figured that Eden would be furious. She told herself that she had no choice and would deal with the rest later. The main thing now is that he survives, and evading the monsters, she ran away. Deep down, she felt ashamed of her actions, but she tried not to think about it. She felt sorry that she couldn't save these people. She had a more important task. Once outside the village, she quickened her pace and almost ran up the hill. Cherry's breath was already catching in her throat when she reached the main gate of the mansion. But she couldn't stop. The monsters stubbornly continued to pursue them. The gates were open, she didn't know why, but there was no time to think. And no matter how much strength she had, she also needed a little rest. Once inside, she literally threw Eden to the ground and returned to close the gate. These gates were deliberately massive so that they would not be easy to open, and they couldn't have been exposed unless someone did it on purpose. Cherry tried to calm down because they still managed to get there alive. Having climbed the observation tower, our heroine looked into the distance. It was terrible. The screams of monsters were heard behind the gates, and the dull noise of their blows against the gates could be heard. The creatures that had been pursuing them were now swarming below, and their numbers were gradually growing. But the trouble was that Eden was also locked inside. She hoped that everything would work out. However, it is better to be a prisoner in the fortress than to become a victim of the evil spirits that are outside. Let him better take refuge in a shelter and stay alive to live until a vaccine is created. Thinking to herself that she was the savior of the world, she heard a voice. All thoughts immediately faded into the background. Cherry hoped that her maid had survived. The mansion was also a kind of fortress, so she hurried inside. Eden hadn't come to yet, so nothing stopped her from going and looking around. Knowing that there might be one of the creatures inside, she stepped very carefully. She even said the maid's name quite quietly. Suddenly she noticed something. She listened. Strange but quiet sounds were coming from the adjoining room. The sound gradually accelerated and drew closer, then suddenly everything stopped. Stopping at the door, she caught her breath, decided to count to 3 and burst in. Red eyes appeared in the darkness. Our heroine froze so as not to give herself away. Something with a huge mouth jumped out right at her. The creature's teeth were covered in blood. There was no time to think, because the monster had nevertheless made its way inside the mansion. Unlike the creepy monsters she had seen so far, this one looked like a wolf. Realizing that this was taking advantage of the open door, Cherry decided to act quickly. There was no time to hesitate. Time was against her, and she was, after all, just a person. She didn't have the speed of the monster, so she had to finish it with one hit. Luckily, our heroine managed to hit the creature right on the torso, and it flew away. Then Cherry quickly ran up and hit the monster on the head with all her strength. Green blood spurted out in all directions like a fountain, and the creature's trembling legs went limp. After confirming that she was completely dead, Cherry felt her strength draining away. She felt uneasy, thinking that she was already starting to get used to it after a couple of contractions. And she was even scared to imagine that in a couple of years this could become just routine. But there was no time to sit around. I didn't see any signs of a struggle, which meant the maid was alive. And if so, then she is hiding somewhere. We need to go and look for her before it's too late. After walking all over the second floor, Cherry still couldn't find her maid. Then she returned to the first floor and again looked around carefully. Suzanne was still nowhere to be seen, but she did notice the door to the kitchen. That's where the monster jumped out from. Did the maid really decide to hide there? She looked at the destruction that this creature left behind and became upset. But there was nothing to be done, and Cherry headed to the kitchen, sighing sadly along the way. Suzanne wasn't there either, but an even greater disappointment awaited her, and she couldn't contain herself. All the supplies she had painstakingly collected were scattered and ruined. Having looked around carefully, I thought that some part could still be saved. But the main thing is that she didn't find the maid there. She must have hidden somewhere else. Returning to the hall, Cherry realized that she had to get rid of this first. She didn't want the maid to get scared when she saw the monster and start cleaning. While I was doing this, I thought that everything wasn't so bad because the garden was already ready. They will be able to grow vegetables, and if they manage to harvest before winter, they will survive. The body had to be taken outside so that it would not attract unnecessary attention. And then Cherry noticed a ribbon on the huge wolf, something familiar, she thought. Then she tried to remember what color ribbon Suzanne had on today. Her heart sank in her chest. This simply couldn't be. She refused to believe it. Having risen, she returned to the place where she first saw this wolf and looked around. She didn't want to believe her guess, but she continued to look at everything carefully. There was a piece of clothing lying on the floor, and she approached that place, her doubts dissipating. The image of the happy maid as she saw her off to the station appeared before her eyes. In the hands of our heroine was the very outfit that Suzanne was wearing. Turning around, she saw another corpse, pierced with something like a rod. The events that happened here quickly flashed before her eyes. She felt like crying, realizing that by killing the wolf, she had taken the life of the servant. To distract herself from her thoughts a little, our heroine continued cleaning up the blood. She hadn't known Suzanne for very long. She had only started working there 6 months ago. But if the world fell, Cherry wanted her to be one of the 2 she protected. And it all ended with her becoming the cause of her sudden death. She continued to think about it as she mechanically swept the rag. How did it happen that I killed Suzanne with these very hands that raised the axe? Then I thought that if I hadn't called Brunel, the maid would have remained alive. Although it's possible that everything would have developed according to a different scenario, she couldn't know that. The thoughts continued to move in this direction. What if she had not stopped Eden? On the contrary, I would have supported him. Perhaps it would have been possible to save several lives. Although in the original it was written that all the inhabitants, except the main characters, died. They kept silent about the rest, but there could have been other survivors hiding somewhere. Forcing herself to focus on the present day, she set to work. Having dragged the corpses outside, she lit a fire and allowed herself to relax for a while. Her thoughts revolved around the fact that she had climbed into this shelter to survive. Then memories came flooding back, and the first thing that came to mind was how she was as a girl. At that time, she was often ill, and her parents were worried about this and looked for a way to cure her. One day, her father came to her and told her that he had found a cure and that she would get better. In a weak voice, she then asked him what kind of potion he had gotten for her. He replied that it was a medicine that would make her strong and help her heal. And when she grows up, she will have to give a helping hand to a girl named Aurora. And even if others remain on the sidelines, she will definitely have to come to the rescue. She laid Eden down in the room next to hers and sat down, leaning against the bed. And she didn't even notice how sleep overcame her. And when she woke up, she remembered what she had dreamed. She thought she dreamed of her father, who was asking her to take care of someone. But she had already forgotten who it was when she noticed that Eden had woken up and wished him good morning. He asked what was going on, and she hoped he didn't remember everything. Eden waited for an answer, and she said that he had passed out and she had brought him here. He then reported that he clearly remembered Cherry Sinclair hitting him on the back of the head. Her trick didn't work. He remembered everything clearly, so he had to speak frankly. She said that the town was a real hell when she left it. Moreover, there were significantly more monsters than people who survived. And if she had left him there, he would have been in danger, or worse, dead. He replied with dissatisfaction that many people there were still in great danger. Cherry didn't tell him that she also wanted to save others, but it was simply impossible. She couldn't share her loss with him. She couldn't even save Suzanne. Breaking the silence, Eden thanked her for risking her life to save him. These words brought tears to her eyes, and her tightly pressed lips began to tremble. Eden, who she thought would accuse and scold her, asked something else. He asked how she was, and then sympathetically advised her to breathe deeper. Our heroine couldn't hold back any longer. As soon as she said the name, she burst out. She said that Suzanne had become a monster, and that's why she had to do it with her own hands. Interrupting her, he asked her not to continue, but advised her to inhale and exhale slowly. Eden continued to calmly persuade her to calm down, saying that everything would work out. Gradually, she felt her breathing even out, and she calmed down. When he asked her if she was feeling better, she nodded in response, thanking him for his sympathy. Then he said that as soon as he sorted out the situation, he would immediately go to the capital. He explained that his sister was there, and he needed to make sure she was okay. Although Brunel is not far from the capital, it is so small that few people know about it. It turns out that if the virus has already reached here, then the capital is probably completely destroyed. From the original, our heroine knew that Aurora should be fine. She started to speak, but Eden interrupted her and said that he thanked her for saving him. And he continued that he still believed that he should save at least one more person. For her, her own life was a priority, but for Eden, the lives of others were more important. The man who had to survive to be saved had honest convictions. After thinking about it, Cherry said that she understood and that he should not abandon his duty. In this hell that has become their world, people like Eden are exactly what is needed. And if he decides to sacrifice himself for others, then she will be the one to stop him, even if, as a result, she becomes the object of his hatred and reproaches for the rest of his life. Having said that he was going to look around outside, he asked her if she would stay and rest. But she refused, and also climbed up the watchtower. Monsters were roaming below. Eden asked if there really weren't any survivors. Maybe they should check in the city. Our heroine understood his intentions, but considered it pure recklessness. After all, going to Brunel without prior preparation is now akin to suicide. He replied that he was aware of this, but that he simply had to contact the capital and find out what was going on there. Because I need to know what the current situation is and whether my sister is okay. He explained that there was a telephone at the police station that he needed to get to. After replying that she understood, Cherry remembered Harrison, for whom she was also worried, adding that now is not the best time for active actions, so we need to wait a little. Agreeing with her plan, Lancaster suddenly turned his attention to the catapult. While he was looking at her, Cherry asked if Nox Ludforshire had survived. A plan of action was forming in Eden's head, and he replied absently that he had survived if he was lucky. Adding that he had always been lucky, she thought that Nox was more of a strategist than a warrior. So it was hard for her to imagine that he was able to survive and fight off all the monsters. She wasn't even sure if he would survive because he was a minor character. The novella did not have a detailed development of events, but now there was harsh reality. Moreover, from my own bitter experience, I already knew that the plot could change. She looked so tense that Eden asked if she was okay. She smiled and replied that everything was fine, she was just a little worried about Nox. Lancaster asked, irritated, how anyone could trust their life to such a man. Our heroine didn't have time to answer because her hungry stomach said everything for her. Embarrassed, Cherry suggested they eat first and then come up with a plan. But before that, I still had to clean up the kitchen because it was still a mess. After some time, I heard some sounds and, having checked, was pleasantly surprised. She advised Eden to take a rest, as she assumed he would be of little use. He was the Duke's heir, after all, but he was doing better than she thought. Apparently her facial expression gave her away, and he asked her not to look at him like that. He said that when he lived in the police dormitory, he did all the cleaning himself. She even found it funny that her surprise was so obvious. Smiling, she replied that she wasn't surprised, it was just a little unexpected. Then he retorted that he was rather surprised that she did it so casually. Then he added that, to be honest, the most amazing thing is the mansion itself. He explained that there were so many supplies here that they would have enough for months, maybe more. He also drew her attention to the fact that the fortifications that had been built were also quite ingenious. You can also monitor the situation outside without leaving the strong walls of the mansion. It seemed as if this place had been prepared in advance, as if they were preparing for a situation like this. Having answered that it was impossible, she thought that she might lie about seeing prophetic dreams. But he didn't give her that opportunity, saying that it was enough talking, it was time to finish. After all, everything needs to be put in order, and then food needs to be prepared, because they are hungry. Having said that it was a good offer, she asked if he knew how to cook. There was a small problem. Since she was reborn, she had never cooked. Naturally, she didn't know how to cook the local way and decided to cook Korean stew. In any case, without a refrigerator, some foods will not last long and will need to be eaten. When she began to taste the stew, Eden looked at her with a little surprise. Taking out 2 bowls, she divided their lunch into equal portions for Eden and herself. He was so impatient that he didn't even look at the finished stew, but started tasting it. Looking up in surprise, he sincerely said that he couldn't believe it, but it turned out delicious. Adding that she knows how to cook, and even seeing it with her own eyes, she still can't believe it. She herself found it hard to believe, but memories from her past life came in handy. They often cooked this dish at home, and it was one of her favorites in that reality. Eden said that he would have to admit that he had looked at her with a rather biased eye. She ate the stew and looked at him. He seemed quite sincere when he said this. She was curious and asked what he said, that he was only so formal with her. She explained that she had not made this up, but had heard it from Mr. Ludfordshire. Putting down his spoon, he asked coldly if she wanted him to talk to her like everyone else. He was so stern and beautiful at the same time that Cherry mumbled no. And Eden asked if she didn't like that he addressed only her formally. And he added that in the current circumstances, all these conventions are completely unnecessary. She thought it would be better if everything remained as it was between them, and said that they would comply. Eden shrugged and smiled slightly, then went back to finishing his stew in silence. Then he said that he didn't expect that in such a situation he would have the chance to eat so well. Cherry replied that it was indeed strange that under such circumstances she still had an appetite. After finishing lunch, Eden said he was wondering if she had a map of the area. Looking at the map, he asked if there was any way to distract the creatures. She knew that monsters reacted to sounds, so they could use that. He spoke thoughtfully about the mechanism he was examining on the wall of the fortification. When he asked her how about using a catapult, she was surprised. So I asked him how he knew, and he replied that he saw it when he was looking around. Eden continued, saying that this mansion is like a fortress. There are even traps on the outside. Once again, putting on an innocent expression, Cherry said that she didn't even know. He looked at her as if he wanted to drill a hole into her, and she felt awkward. He said out loud that he really looked like the kind of person who could be so easily manipulated. Maybe she thinks he's a fool, then she thought he wasn't far from the truth. But she still had no intention of revealing everything to him, even despite his barbs. Guessing that this wouldn't get through to Cherry, he said he would close his eyes this time. Cheerful, she asked why this mask of generosity was there after such caustic words. Then he asked for forgiveness, explaining that this was simply his way of expressing himself. However, he tries to be polite to her. She saved his life, and he is grateful. She agreed with this because she had seen how he interacted with Knox and others. Even then, at their first meeting on No Tune Street, she found him frightening. A true servant of the law, from whom no criminal in the country can escape. Smiling radiantly, she decided that there was no point in provoking him unnecessarily. Eden spoke sternly and asked to get back to business, and asked about the catapult. He continued that there were too many monsters, and the catapult would hardly help them much. In addition, if loud noises are heard, they may attract their attention to the shelter. Cherry thought, what if instead of hitting the monsters, she aimed at something else? She told him her thought, and Eden replied that they were thinking along the same lines. The idea was to not aim at the creatures because it doesn't do anything. And they would direct the catapult fire directly at Brunel, but there were still some nuances. It was necessary to avoid entering those buildings where there might presumably be survivors. But the sound from hitting smaller structures may not distract the monsters at all. A suitable target had to be found, and looking at the map, Cherry finally found it. Looking at her burning gaze, then at the map, Officer Lancaster agreed. A few days before Brunel's fall, a gala evening was held in the capital, Benton. As usually happens at such large social events, people gossiped. Now on everyone's lips was the scandal connected with our heroine and Sir Eden. He was, after all, the Duke's heir. It was the highest circle of aristocracy. And although Cherry belonged to the Sinclair family, she was still not his equal. They discussed the fact that Sir Eden valued ability more than nobility. They said that Lady Sinclair had no talents, only one value, her money. Aurora was upset by these conversations because she didn't know how she could get to Brunel now. Under these circumstances, she won't be able to get there, since now we're only talking about her brother. She thought that maybe it was not bad that it was like that, but she still didn't know where this city was. The conversation then turned to the fact that this couple had built a love nest in an abandoned mansion. One of the ladies did not believe that Lady Sinclair could settle in the old house. After all, everyone knows how capricious she is, so no one will believe that she would do such a thing. Aurora thought that they were gossiping about her too, only she was an orphan who was taken in. She always knew that people were like that, so she decided to ignore it. She had a completely different task. She needed to leave as soon as possible to see her brother. But unlike our heroine, Aurora was not prepared for the last days of this world. That's why when I saw panic and people running, I was taken aback by the surprise. However, quite soon she saw and understood the reason for what was happening on the streets. Lady Lancaster had already encountered something similar once, and she did not want to repeat the experience. Only, unlike the previous time, today everything was much larger and more terrible. Although the very appearance of the monsters did not raise any doubts in her, they were the same as they were then. She had never been naturally strong, so now she simply called on her brother for help. But he could not hear her call, although he was worried and anxious for her with all his heart. Now he was interested in one thing in Cherry's hands, and he was about to ask. Pointing to the binoculars, Eden asked when she had managed to grab this with her. Laughing ironically, she explained that it was just her opera glasses and nothing more. In response, he also made a joke, saying that firstly, he did not see any theatres in the area. Then, more seriously, he added that it didn't matter and asked to give it to him. Cherry thought he was keeping his word and was genuinely trying not to pester her. Thanks to its location on a hill, the mansion offered a commanding view of Brunel's entire estate. Looking at Eden, she thought that he didn't really need her help. It's no wonder that in the book he surpassed the main character and became the first in the top for survivability and strength. He is not one of those who would have undeservedly achieved such a high position, but the situation has changed. And if he dies unexpectedly, and the world, deprived of a vaccine, will be doomed to destruction. Our heroine asked Eden if they hit the target, everything would work out as planned. He replied that yes, because considering what it would be made of, the collapse would be noisy. But if the monsters rush into the city, it will be difficult for them to get in there themselves. Having agreed, he said that the fountain and the site might not be located very close to each other. But both objects will be within the reach of the creatures, but there is one way out. So there's no point in making things more complicated, and it's best for him to become the bait himself, she protested. Moreover, she advised him not to even think about it. Then he tried to persuade her. Lady Sinclair nearly roared as she informed him that she would never allow him to do that. I thought to myself that until the vaccine was created, I would protect his life, no matter what happened. And then she intended to live out the rest of her days in solitude, in peace and quiet. He said he understood, but she still made it clear that he could not sacrifice himself, especially because of one ghostly call, and she will also personally protect him. Hearing such a heated speech, he shut up and looked at her with surprise. While they were together, she had no choice but to consider her life and his to be of equal value. His expression changed, and he suddenly burst into incredulous laughter. Eden turned away slightly, then looked at her as if she had said something stupid. After laughing, he said that the only thing left to do was to resort to the last method. Looking at him hopefully, she asked if there was any other option. And without changing his expression, he blurted out that all that was left was to rely on fate. This was not at all the answer she expected. It was nonsense. He said he was joking, so he suggested doing it without fists and a frowning face. He asked afterward that she didn't understand jokes, and Cherry mentally called him a bastard. But Eden quickly changed the subject and asked her to see what idea he had. Pointing to the map, he said that there was a prison in the basement of this police station. In surprise, she even asked again, "Is there a dungeon in this tiny area?" Then he replied that, as a rule, they are present in all areas of the old building. There is a secret door in the basement of the prison, and it leads to the body disposal area. Our heroine was surprised by the very existence of the prison, as criminals were still dying. She winced as she remembered the domestic abuser being beaten at the station. Then she asked how often criminals die in such a small town. Eden replied that in any case, she should not be bothered by this garbage, but by the morgue itself. And if they can get into the city through it, they can avoid the attention of the monsters. To reassure her, Eden added that the morgue had not been used for its intended purpose for a long time. After listening to his arguments, she asked what this had to do with their plan. He then explained to her that the disposal site connected to the forest behind the mansion. Therefore, they will be able to leave Brunel later using this passage. She concluded that they would walk among the corpses to avoid encountering monsters. Cherry clarified that the original plan to hit the statue remains in place. The answer to her was yes, but he was not sure if it was possible. The distance was very great. To which she reminded him of her strength, explaining that with her nothing is impossible. Eden stared wide-eyed, as if he had heard something completely unexpected. Then he laughed again, and she asked him why he was laughing again and asked him to laugh more quietly. She even took a special look at the monster's reaction. Their loud laughter was clearly noticed by them. Her words had no effect on him. She whispered in his ear again to be quieter. For a few moments, he even managed to contain his laughter, and then he laughed again. Then, unable to bear it any longer, she hit him on the back, but immediately asked if it was too hard. Alarmed, she leaned over and found his shoulders shaking with laughter. Eden said quietly that solving everything by force seemed to him a rather absurd idea. But she was already distracted by something else. It was getting dark, and she suggested waiting for the sunrise. Surprisingly, Lancaster agreed, adding that moonlight was not enough for accuracy. Having agreed, they decided to be fully prepared to go out into the city by the morning. When she lit the wall lantern with a lighter, the house became a little warmer. However, this was clearly not enough. The nights were still quite cold. Then she thought that to increase the temperature she needed to light a fireplace. Returning to the room, she sat down in front of the fireplace and turned on the lighter again. But the fire didn't want to flare up on the wood. The flame flared up slightly and then immediately went out. The first explanation that came to her mind was that the firewood was too old. Wondering if there might be a draft, she examined the top of the fireplace. But I couldn't really see anything, but it clearly wasn't functioning properly. Cherry sat and looked at the firewood as if enchanted, then heard Eden's voice. He called her, only at that moment she tried to come to her senses and got up to go out. Suddenly another voice was heard behind her, quietly asking her not to leave. She turned her head in fear and looked around, but it was quiet and dark there, like in an abyss. Meanwhile, Eden said that they needed to get ready, but she seemed worried about something. Then she asked him if he had asked her not to leave. He replied that he had not. He asked her if she thought there was someone there, to which she replied that she must have imagined it. Looking around warily, he concluded that there was nowhere to hide. Then he joked that even if there was, she, with her remarkable strength, had nothing to fear. Thinking that the joke was inappropriate, she asked if he had come for some reason. His gaze caught on one thing, and he asked if she knew how to use an axe. Having thoughtfully answered that it had happened recently, she asked why he was actually asking. At that very moment, a memory flashed through her mind. She had clearly and seriously screwed up. Looking at the axe, he noted that it was a familiar thing, and he thought the initials were a coincidence. Then he asked if it was she who was the woman who killed the monster on Northune Street. She felt her breath catch as she met his gaze. Barely managing to stutter, she asked him why he thought so and why he was asking her. She was still feigning innocence when he said everything was falling into place. Showing the brooch, Eden said that it was enough to play the fool. This thing belonged to her. He said he had some suspicions, but he couldn't connect the two images. The one who saved his sister and the one who was a socialite, they are too different. I couldn't believe it was the same person, but now that I know her better, I've changed my mind. And at the moment I am inclined to believe that she could well have been that very girl. Cherry knew there was no point in pretending any longer, but she was in no hurry to admit it. Looking at her sternly, he asked her to answer and stop trying to lead her around by the nose. Then she admitted that the brooch really belonged to her, and now there was nowhere to run. So she'll probably have to tell him, starting with the fact that she didn't want any trouble. But most of all, she didn't want her power to become known, he asked, and that's all. His suspicions were too much for her, but she asked if any other motives were needed. She explained that the main virtue of a lady of high society is fragility and weakness. With slight disbelief, Eden asked if she cared about the merits of a society lady. She replied, "What's wrong with that? She wants to become a true aristocrat in the future. After all, no one reproaches the heir to the ducal title for joining the ordinary police." He said he would ask her a little differently what she was doing on Nortune Street that night. There was an icy chill in his voice as he continued, "Was it she who summoned Aurora?" Cherry thought that if he kept throwing around accusations like that, he would blame her for the end of the world. Eden continued that since she had taken the axe, it meant she knew what she might be facing. Knowing that she could not share the truth about her knowledge, she came up with an excuse. She said that she knew because she had received a strange letter before. It said that a monster would appear at this address and start killing people. When he asked her why she didn't go to the police, she replied that they wouldn't have believed her. He agreed with this, but asked how she would then explain the purchase of this mansion. It was because after meeting that creature, she wanted to leave the capital. She added that the letter also said that those who are bitten by a monster also turn into them. She continued that she had more money than she could handle, and that she would lose a little in any case. But after thinking about the situation, she decided that it would be best to have a shelter just in case. Well, after that incident with the farmer, it was clear that her decision was the right one. Cherry added that she didn't know who sent the letter, but it turned out to be true. Raising an eyebrow, he looked appraisingly at our heroine and was about to continue. The policeman said harshly that she apparently had no intention of telling the truth. A wild thought flashed through her head about how he was going to digest this truth. She remembered well the day when she dumped all this on Harrison. He didn't believe it. Eden, meanwhile, changed his tone and said that he had already told her that he would return the favor. She came up with a weak excuse, but he'll let it slide. There's no time for that now. He couldn't even imagine how much she wanted to hit him right now. Turning around, he added that this did not mean that he trusted her. Too many things did not add up. For safety reasons, they agreed to take turns staying on duty until the morning. Our heroine understood his distrust, but she could not act otherwise. Having thought about how she could fall asleep in such a situation, she slept until the morning. The sun was breaking on the horizon when she asked him if he was probably tired. She apologized. Then he told her that he had thought something had happened to her. And when the watch was coming to an end, he went down to check if everything was okay with her. Then I discovered that she was snoring so loudly that the walls were shaking, and she took it terribly. He quickly added that he was joking, and she slept so quietly that she looked like a dead person. Cheering up, she suggested that he go and rest a bit before the sun rose. However, Eden refused, so she asked if maybe she should sleep instead of him. The answer she received was that usually in such cases, they offer to keep her company. And she said that she had no desire at all to entertain him with her conversations. Cherry was distracted again and asked if there had been any significant events during this time. After a negative answer, I asked her what that was behind her back. Her explanation was that she took the bag to replenish necessary supplies. Eden then noted that, judging by her actions, she possessed enviable prudence. And he doesn't understand why people think she's a useless heiress, she laughed. He continued that if anyone later slandered her, he would shut them up. To which Cherry retorted that if this situation were to happen everywhere, and if the whole world fell. When he said that it was impossible, she replied that he himself could see what was happening. The monsters are multiplying and the infection is 100%, so the probability is quite real. Somewhat unexpectedly for her, he asked, so they were left alone. But still, she didn't think that there were no survivors because Aurora should have survived. His words were that all that remains is to pray, because some hope is necessary. It seemed to her that he spoke about hope somehow, not very enthusiastically and joyfully. And she heard him ask if it wasn't dangerous if they were the only ones left in the world. Surprised, she asked who they should be afraid of if there really were only 2 survivors. Eden chuckled and said that was the danger and asked if she trusted him. Thinking that he was a little crazy today because of her, she decided to play along with him. After she replied that she trusted him, Eden asked what the limits of that trust were. She felt like it was a test, so she clenched her fist and replied that she could handle it for now. After these words, he laughed again, as if he could not believe what he heard. He said later that he kept wondering why fate had brought them together in this solitude. But now I'm glad that I ended up with her, sincerely adding that this is not a joke now. Then, in a serious tone, he said that it was enough chatter and time to get down to business. Looking at the stones that she had prepared earlier, she thought that the stone would be heavier. She said out loud that she would have to go out later and get more, otherwise these would not be enough. However, he was curious about where these came from, so he asked about it. Our heroine sincerely told that she hid a little while they were repairing the wall. Eden said it could wait, it might not be needed at all. He hoped that by contacting the capital everything would work out, but she had a different opinion. But she didn't talk about it. Now she had other worries. What if she didn't succeed? She made a lot of promises, but a catapult isn't the most accurate thing, and its range is limited. And yet she did not lose hope, because her weapon was important, mainly because of its tension force. Suddenly Lancaster swore loudly, then reported that Ludforshire had somehow survived. He then said that the problem was that he found himself in the middle of the square and couldn't escape. It was unexpected news. She didn't really hope that Knox would be able to do this. She was eager to see for herself and began to take away the binoculars. To some extent, she was even worried about Ludforshire, and she had reasons for that. How did he end up in such a place, she said. He must have tried unsuccessfully to leave the city. A plan formed in her head, but without voicing it, she said that she would cover for Knox. Eden didn't even immediately understand what she meant, so he asked again in surprise. Then Cherry briefly replied that Ludforshire needed help getting out of the trap. Initially, they planned to destroy the statue of the girl in the center of the square. In order to distract the monsters and sneak into Brunel, the goal now changed. She suggested destroying the building on the right, thereby luring the monsters in that direction. Then Ludforshire would have a chance to escape in the other direction, but there were few stones. Eden asked if she could get it in on the first try. She said she should try. Understanding his concern, she added that they still needed to distract the monsters. Our heroine suggested shooting at the kiosk first, as there didn't seem to be any survivors there. Having taken command, as befits an officer, he began the countdown with precision. When he said 2, she took a couple more steps back, her whole body tensing up. But on the other hand, she didn't care. Even if he missed, he would still crash next to her. Wishing herself luck and not to miss, exactly on the count of 3, she released the taut rope. In a past life, our heroine, like many of her peers, had a toy. However, she was exceptionally good in one of the many presented at the time. She could launch this eternally yellow bird for hours with great pleasure. And so, with the slingshot, our heroine was especially good at this game with angry birds. And not only in the game, she always had a talent for aiming and hitting, which is what happened. Her seemingly useless skills came in handy, and she hit the mark. Eden agreed that it was amazing, but it was too early to relax. The thunder was louder than expected, and now even the distant monsters are rushing into the square. And in such conditions, it will be very difficult for Ludforshire to break through unnoticed. Without taking his eyes off the binoculars, Eden now suggested shooting at the house to the right of the stall. Cherry said she would try and began to repeat the movements, but she was no longer as nervous. Her partner began counting again, his voice clear but not loud. When she heard the number 3, she let go of her hands again, and there was a thunderous sound in the distance. Even from there, she could see that she had hit the target, so she joyfully exclaimed that she had hit the bull's eye. However, she did it too emotionally, and Eden was forced to point this out. She felt a little awkward because she knew better than anyone about maintaining silence. A second later, she returned to the main question, what was Ludforshire doing there? Eden replied that Knox was hesitating and seemed to be trying to find who had thrown the stone. She wanted to ask if he had looked in their direction, but Eden had already reported that he had run. Then Cherry asked if it was time to begin the main part of their plan. About an hour ago, Ludforshire found itself cut off from all escape routes. He reflected on the fact that for 2 days he had been trying to find a way to leave the city. The streets were filled with creatures whose nature was unknown to him, and he found himself powerless. It all started on the day when Lady Sinclair left Brunel on important business. Knox had already begun to wonder what business Cherry might have in the neighbouring town. The inferno that started at the carriage rental office instantly engulfed the entire city. He was horrified by what was happening right before his eyes and didn't know what to do. All he could comprehend then was that a man was devouring another man. People who were bitten by the creatures turned into creatures themselves and bit others. Everything that was happening did not fit into any scientific facts known to him. It was truly hellish hours. People were running through the streets, running away and transforming. Ludforshire was driven only by the feeling of self-preservation. He wanted to escape. And so for the last 2 days, he had been unsuccessfully searching for a way to leave this city. His thoughts were interrupted by a terrible roar from the square. He looked out. It was noticeable that this noise attracted monsters, and they moved in that direction. He swore, and at that moment a second shot rang out. Knox was stunned. All he could figure out at that moment was that someone was doing this on purpose. But who? And although it was difficult to think in such a situation, he figured out where it had come from. His gaze fell on the mansion. Could Lady Sinclair really be behind these actions? However, looking back at the square, I saw that the escape route had opened. Having decided that there is no point in getting to the bottom of the truth, now it is time to quickly run away. As Knox hid behind the alley, he wondered who the woman really was. Eden agreed that they needed to go after Knox, but he wondered if he would be able to find him there. Cherry replied that if she had known in advance, maybe she should have gone straight ahead from the mansion. She asked if he could make a plan to break into the police station and rescue the doctor. After all, even if you have to go head-on, you need at least a minimal plan. Eden, without missing a beat, asked if she knew there was a clock tower in the south of Brunel. And if it really is Knox, then he will certainly climb this tower. She was a little surprised, because they were at risk of being trapped, just like Knox had been before. Lancaster explained that he always chooses the high ground when in trouble. And he continued that the first thing they should do was get Ludforshire out of the tower, then enter the police station and establish contact with the capital, and then return. Our heroine asked what if Ludforshire was not on the clock tower. The answer to her was that then they were powerless, because they would not be able to search the city. However, Knox is a doctor, which means in a dead world he is just as necessary as Eden. But Cherry also considered the option of going to save Ludforshire alone. Looking at the officer, she said that it was time to go out before it was too late. Trouble awaited them just outside the gates, but Lancaster, like a man, walked ahead. She, however, rushed to his aid, but still noted that it was not for nothing that he was the main character. In some ways, this was even to her advantage. She didn't have to strain herself too much. After the first collision, she remembered the kerosene, which was running out. She shared that the lamp in her room was almost empty, and Eden agreed with her. And then he asked us to be careful and not make noise, because the city was already visible. Agreeing, she suggested using hand signals to avoid talking. He didn't mind, because they wouldn't be able to have long conversations at Brunel. She showed the last one, and Eden noted that the monsters wouldn't understand any of it anyway. He laughed again, but her face said it all. She was ready to hit him. Hiding his smile, he squeezed out that he understood everything. The main thing was that she was happy. And even though her hands were itching, Cherry said Knox would still have to be saved. Her companion was not against it, but thought it would be wiser to call for reinforcements as soon as possible. She couldn't stand his stubbornness, but she didn't insist that this chaos was everywhere. At that moment, Lancaster shouted at her to be careful. There was a monster behind her. With a quick movement, having finished with him, she thought that even without this, everything irritated her. Realizing that she couldn't convince Eden, she suggested splitting up and acting one at a time. She said she would go after Knox, but Lancaster objected it was too dangerous. Then she concluded that otherwise they would never come to a consensus. She hoped that he would still go with her, and when he spoke, she was glad. I asked him what exactly he was proposing, but his solution was to go to the phone. He explained that the monsters were most likely now gathered near the destroyed building, so he will go straight to the police station and call the capital. He suggested that she go to the tower and save Ludforshire, as agreed. He added that he didn't want Knox to get cocky when he found out he had come to save him. He said later that he was joking, but it would be better to go into the city if fewer people came. There are fewer monsters near the tower now, and it would be wiser to save Knox and then unite. Having agreed, she asked Eden not to rush into trouble, otherwise she wouldn't be able to knock him out from behind. He smiled and replied that he was not the type of person who got into trouble easily, and he asked her that if Knox was not in the tower, not to waste time and to return quickly. Approaching the tower, Cherry decided that she believed him, but it was better to meet sooner. Wishing herself luck, she thought that Ludforshire simply had to be there. She realized that she felt more confident with the officer around than she did alone. And on top of everything, some shadow flashed. It seemed to her, or there was a person inside. But the next second she realized that it was a monster again and grabbed the axe. She needed to go up, but there was another obstacle in the way, and it really irritated her. Having taken out my anger on the monster, I thought that I had really almost gotten used to it. Then I listened. It was quiet. It seemed I had dealt with it, and those creatures were not nearby. I told myself once again that I can't let my guard down for even a minute. Stepping carefully, she mentally urged Ludforshire not to let her down. She even wanted to come up with some kind of punishment for him if he wasn't there. Without realizing it, she exhaled when she saw him peacefully smoking. But unlike her, Knox himself was extremely surprised when he saw Lady Sinclair. Thinking that, thank God, he was alive, she asked a stupid question about what he was doing here. Puffing on his cigar as if he were at a social gathering, Knox replied that he was resting. He takes a breath and never expected Cherry Sinclair to join his company. After blowing out smoke, he added that he assumed she was safe. That he doesn't know how she got here, but therefore she will share her last moments with him. She thought, what kind of nonsense is he talking about? She came to save him, not to listen to this nonsense. When she asked what he was talking about, Knox said it was too real to be the last of the hallucinations. After all, Lady Sinclair would never have come here to save him. Having said that it wasn't a glitch, she asked why he assumed that she wouldn't save him. Knox started talking about those stones, but she interrupted him with a question about whether he had been bitten. It was slow to dawn on him, so she asked again about the creature's bite. Then he replied that they hadn't bitten him, but while he was climbing up, he ran into a broken railing. When she asked him if he could get up, he said that he could, but he had badly injured his leg. And even if he goes down, he won't pass by the creatures and theatrically ask to leave him. Realizing that Knox would continue to clownish himself, she decided to act on her own. He started shouting, but from the moment he appeared, all she did was try to quarrel. She barked back that if he didn't shut up, she would leave him, something he quickly learned. Our heroine began to descend, the weight of her shoulders quietly counting the steps. He also sighed. He really wanted to ask a question, but he didn't know if it would be appropriate. Thinking that nothing terrible would happen, he asked who she really was. She answered, but he didn't mean her name, so she asked him not to distract her. She explained that things were already difficult for her, and she had no time for talking, otherwise she would leave him. Cherry said that from the very beginning he spoke of her as if she was heartless, and she reminded him of his words that she would never come to his aid. Then he asked if they hadn't thrown those stones to save only their own skins. He added that he saw them throwing stones from the mansion, using the city as bait. She thought he was a complete idiot if he understood everything that way, and decided to clarify it. She told him to listen to her very carefully. They really were throwing stones. But in order to save him, he muttered that now she began to make excuses. Throwing him off her back, she said that at that moment he was trapped in the square. And she threw stones in the opposite direction and cleared the way for him. After she came to save him, he treats her like she is heartless. Taking a deep breath, she finished by saying that it was torture and that she should not have followed him. Realizing his mistake, he said that it seemed he had been mistaken about her and apologized. And he's not apologizing because she might leave him. He's not that rude. She had no doubts about his words of gratitude, and it seemed to get through to him. So Cherry said that enough talk, and we needed to get out of here immediately. Extending her hand of friendship to him, she added that she had to meet someone. And completely amused, she asked him to climb onto her back and quickly. Suddenly he asked her what she was going to appear in front of Eden like that. She asked again, and he explained that he would rather die than see him on her back. Then he promised that he would find those scoundrels who created this chaos and deal with them. Thinking that he had become talkative, she asked him to sit quietly, otherwise he would fly into the bushes. They had almost reached the site, but Eden was nowhere to be seen, and she became worried. Thinking about where he could be stuck, I said out loud, "Where is Lancaster? I wish I could find him soon." Her heart was screaming inside that she wouldn't be able to calm down until she saw that he was okay. Knox asked if Lady Sinclair had fallen in love with Sir Lancaster by any chance. Having received a negative answer, he asked another question. Why then does he want to find Eden so much? She was already quite fed up with his questions, and she answered evasively that she wanted to go home. A shot rang out ahead, and Knox began to babble that they should run faster. Having replied that she knew everything herself, she ran further down the street as fast as she could. The thought was pounding in her head that it was definitely a shot, but why was they shooting here? She understood that Eden wasn't a complete fool, and knew that the monsters would come running to this noise. In all cases, they were in trouble, and she still didn't know what had happened to Lancaster. Finally, she could see what was happening, so she hurried even faster. She had already seen Eden, who was fighting alone against another viral monster. Cherry knew in her mind that he, as the main character, could handle it just fine, but she was still nervous. Eden must survive at any cost, but by the time they arrived, it was already over. Then she could breathe a sigh of relief, because it was clear who exactly had been attacked. Lancaster helped another officer up and saw Knox, and in such a state. Ludforshire muttered quietly that he would rather die than be so disgraced. A bolt of lightning flashed between the two men. They were ready to grapple. Cherry yelled that the monsters were coming, and Eden suggested that everyone go to the station. Once inside, having gotten rid of the burden, our heroine thought that it was good that everyone was alive. She knew it wasn't over yet, but she could catch her breath. Eden went to the phone. Knox asked sarcastically where the tough cop had been hanging out while Miss Cherry was taking risks alone. The officer replied that the gentleman had no right to vote and asked him to keep his mouth shut. Then Knox asked the miss, she heard it, what kind of aristocrat he is a real bandit. Cherry parried, but it was useful for survival. Knox saw how many monsters were killed. Our heroine thought that there probably wouldn't be anyone to answer this call. Her actions had already caused a butterfly effect in the plot, but she hoped the future could be changed. Brunel had already fallen under the onslaught of monsters, and yet she prayed that the capital would stand. Meanwhile, without waiting for an answer, Lancaster stated that it had not worked. Then the inspector said that he had already said that this was a dead end. He had already tried. And even if the capital is in order, they are unlikely to get to such a remote place as Brunel. The doctor, having said that the officer had an unhealthy complexion, suggested examining him. When he added that sweat was pouring down, Cherry tensed up. Something was wrong. The inspector remembered that he had been bitten on the wrist, and she cursed silently. Knox also listened with suspicion that the officer was not in pain, but it was as if everything was numb. Realizing that this was one of the signs of mutation, Knox suggested leaving immediately. She picked it up and commanded Eden to quickly gather everything he needed. Like a true officer, he reported that he had taken communications equipment and some equipment. Looking at the inspector, Cherry thought that if Knox was right, this was the first sign of infection. According to the original, the symptoms that appear immediately after infection are different for everyone. Some turned into monsters almost immediately, but the book mentioned others as well. There were people whose transformation was slow, like this inspector. And before the infection takes hold of him completely, he must be killed quickly and with one blow. These thoughts, along with images of her already killed monsters, flashed through her imagination. Pulling herself together, she gripped the handle of her weapon and quietly called out to Eden. Cherry even flinched a little from surprise, but his hand on her shoulder gave her confidence. Still holding her shoulder, he said the words slowly and pulled her back. So they reached the stairs of the police station, and he asked them to listen carefully. While he is distracted, she takes Ludfortia and goes around him from behind. Then he goes through the door behind the stairs and goes down into the underground prison. Once you go down, there will be a door in the corner leading to a place for disposal of corpses. She protested because he had to go with them. He wasn't going to become bait again. In a soothing tone, Eden replied that he would follow them as soon as they disappeared. They saw how the inspector's police uniform was torn due to the bloated body. His face, asking questions in a creepy voice, became more and more distorted. Lancaster, drawing his weapon, turned to face her and commanded her to hurry. She picked up Knox like a sack of potatoes and hurried to disappear through the side door. After asking the doctor to be patient for a little while, she shouted to Eden to be careful of his teeth. Taking one last look at Lancaster, she began to descend the stairs. Knox spoke up, thanking her for her help and asking if she could put it down already. He urged her to consider his status and reputation, and she replied that she would be glad to. But if he could handle it himself, she wouldn't bother and would ask him to stop being capricious. Otherwise, regardless of his status, he will throw him straight into the monster's mouth. She thought to herself that he might pee in his pants, but she wouldn't leave the doctor. Another thing is that I listened to the second main character whine, and somehow, upon hearing the sound, I froze. Ludfortia froze next to her, and from above she heard a rumble and a creaking door. Hearing Eden's voice, they relaxed, and he asked why they froze like sleepy flies. When she asked if everything was okay, he replied that there was no reason to worry. Knox, in his amiably caustic manner, said there was no need to worry about Eden. After asking what he was talking about, Lancaster advised the doctor to say thank you for not abandoning him. He replied that he was deeply offended because they had dragged in the one who had asked to be left behind by force. She thought he was saying it was better to die than to see him get there on her back. Eden retorted that he didn't want to die as well-mannered, and Knox snapped back. Having said that Miss can only learn bad things from such a type, it is better to behave with dignity. Thinking that they should let them squabble, Cherry asked whether the area was intact, but the noise was loud. The officer replied that the sound was made by a monster that exploded when he cut it. He said this without taking his eyes off Knox, and our heroine even regretted that she had asked at all. However, Eden assessed the situation and said that the sound was loud and the creatures must have heard it. This means that they will start moving in this direction, and it would be advisable for them to hurry from here. Sinclair remembered that they had to go through the morgue and asked if they should go in there. Lancaster replied that there would probably be a lot of dust there, since it had not been used for a long time, adding that it was as if they were passing through a tunnel connecting it to the well. Knox started talking about how he was a promising doctor, and she said that she was the heiress of the family. After listening to how they were protecting themselves from the unpleasant, the officer suggested that they stay. Once their attention was captured, he said that we would go over the details again. As discussed earlier, he will go first, then Knox, and finally Ms. Sinclair. He grinned and said that he had already rushed off and recommended that the others not fall behind. Our heroine exchanged glances with Ludfortia. Their looks spoke of complete distrust. There was nothing to do, and Knox said that he would see if he could get out alive. Cherry hadn't been thrilled about the idea from the start, and now she was even less so. Peering into the darkness, I realized that the bottom was not visible. It seemed that the passage was long. A voice was heard from below. It told her to jump without fear. They were waiting for her. She recognized Eden's voice and thought she had only hesitated for a moment, and he was already rushing her. Having shouted that it was good, she was flying. She realized that it felt like she was sliding down a hill. Then she got scared, because now she would fall right on the floor and be crushed into a pancake. When this didn't happen, I wondered what was so soft and hard at the same time. Opening one eye, she saw Eden's face, his blue eyes looking straight at her. The moment was interrupted by Knox's grumbling, asking if he should stop playing the prince. After saying that it was a great job, they barely got any closer to their destination. Continuing in the same tone, he asked if Lancaster could take them further. Eden walked forward, and the doctor started talking about how he continued to wonder, who is she really? To which Cherry asked that her power does not give her peace. He replied that he was watching her, and that inside he had the impression that she knew the reason. That Miss Cherry knows the reason why all this chaos with the monsters has started. Frowning, I thought that it was just the intuition of a psychic, but she had already developed immunity. She responded with a question asking if she really needed to wander around the area in the company of men. Noting that there is some truth, but the image he knows does not correspond to reality. Changing the subject, Cherry asked if everything was okay with the leg, as the lips were already blue. She added that as soon as they return, they will treat the wounds and give a tetanus shot. When he was surprised, she explained that she had travelled a lot with her parents since childhood. Knox said he had given the injection back in the tower, thanks to the medication he had brought with him. She thought how thoughtful he was not to forget about such valuable things. Lancaster watched them from afar and thought it was time to hurry, so I shouted to them that they were there, and now they needed to climb, and she volunteered first. Taking on the role of pioneer, she began the climb, hearing Knox encouraging her. Seeing the sky, she relaxed. It seemed that the tunnel was still connected to the surface. As Eden had said, the woods behind the police station led to the mountain behind the happy home. And if they don't hesitate, they'll get there in no time. Here it was straight ahead. Lancaster was despondent, the lack of news from the city making their situation feel dire. Knox said that based on his observations, he could say that the epidemic had broken out in full force. The groom stuck in his memory. After examining him, he noticed how unwell he was. That groom was from the capital, and the conclusion suggests itself that the source of the infection was there. After listening to Knox's arguments, our heroine thought that his guess was close to the truth. After all, according to the plot of the story, the alchemists and Marquis Casey really did conduct experiments. But what history has been silent about is what exactly their reckless experiments consisted of. And our heroine didn't know for sure why exactly they were made. But everyone knew from newspaper reports that the Marquis and his family were the first to suffer. Eden broke the silence and said that the capital had become the virus's refuge. And then it turns out that the situation there is even more deplorable than in Brunel. Knox said that Lancaster must be feeling uneasy since his sister was in the capital. Then Eden retorted that there was no need to worry about other people's relatives, but to think about your own. He replied that his family would not disappear, but Cherry listened to them and thought about something else. She interrupted them and asked if their relatives were still in good health. Although the fate of the relatives is currently unknown, there is still hope for the best. The doctor said that he would rather die as a human than turn into a monster. The officer interrupted the conversation and said that it was enough chatter, it was already late, and it was time for them to go back. Cherry thought that they had someone to worry about, but she had been alone in this world for a long time. And she would not say that Lancaster's feelings were alien to her, for in her case, there had already been losses. Now, remembering Suzanne, she was tormented, although she understood that she could not do anything. But she still knew there was hope, so now she just had to hold on. And also to pray that her only relative, Harrison, would still escape trouble. Suddenly, Knox asked Cherry if she had been bitten by accident. She replied that no. He asked not to be offended, but he thought that her monstrous strength was connected with the infection. Cherry said that it was not related in any way. Her power appeared several years ago. Mr. Ludforshire was not aware of this because she carefully concealed it. She added that the reason why she hid it also didn't need to be explained. Thanks to the catapult, only a couple of creatures remained near the mansion. To make it easier to break through, she said that she would be better off carrying Knox further. He asked me to handle it carefully and try to imagine that it was fragile glass. Everyone tensed and fell silent, each step becoming more and more cautious. Eden stepped forward a little, looking carefully at the space in front of the gate. He made a gesture that imitated a pistol shot, which was a signal to attack. Our heroine also got ready, because perhaps her help could come in handy. It all happened in the blink of an eye. Swinging his sword, he cut down the monsters with one blow. Moreover, it seemed that he was fighting the monsters simultaneously without any difficulty. She thought that if Eden was really on her side, then he was the coolest ally. Now the way was clear, and they reached the gate without difficulty. She called Eden. When he responded, Cherry said Knox had a fever and needed to be taken to bed immediately. Having answered that he understood, he asked to give him the key to the gate so as not to disturb the doctor. After fiddling with the gate, the officer grumbled about how she had managed to install it at all. She was even pleased that someone noticed her efforts and then rushed into the yard. She was in such a hurry that she got caught in her bag and the gate was already almost closed. Eden warned her that other creatures were approaching and that she should move faster. She thought that she would deal with the bag later, especially since there were a lot of them in the house. At that moment, our heroine didn't even think about the consequences that this would lead to. They had enough troubles as it was, and their primary concern was Knox's condition. When asked how the doctor was, Eden closed the door and replied that the fever had increased. And he thinks that because Ludfortia relaxed, he then asked what was wrong with the bag. Our heroine replied that the bag had died, as had the kerosene that was in the lamp. She thought that the grass she had grabbed just in case had survived, only the box had been damaged. Lancaster suggested that she rest as the day was long and he would stand guard. To which she replied that he should too, since there was no need for a guard. And although the day was indeed busy, she wanted to take a little walk. Opening the door to the garden, she said that everyone deserved a little peace and quiet today. Then she said that now she would be able to take care of the garden and that she needed to check her supplies. Suddenly, Eden reminded her of the conversation with Knox they had had on the road. He began by saying that if her desire to join the aristocracy was so great, and he continued that she even hid her true nature, so why didn't she buy the title? After all, given her family's financial capabilities, acquiring the title would have been a mere trifle. Our heroine was silent for a couple of minutes. She wanted to explain everything to him correctly. Explain why her mother and father are not of the nobility and why she herself is not either. When she was younger, especially after her parents died, she worried about this. She said out loud that having a title in itself does not make a person an aristocrat. Then she asked why he himself, being from the highest nobility, did not want to live the life of a duke. He replied that 5 years ago he himself intended to follow in his father's footsteps. It turned out that the Duke wore such a perfect mask that he deceived even his son. He himself did not dirty his hands, but he was involved in crimes and illegal activities. Eden continued that, unfortunately, he had failed to expose his own father, but by becoming a policeman, he can catch people like his father and thereby atone for his guilt. Cherry said the very desire for redemption was admirable. In addition, he has already provided real help to many people, and they are grateful to him. And now that the past no longer matters, are there any left who can punish the Duke? She thought to herself that Eden had often thought about how to overthrow the Duke of Lancaster. She wanted to believe that he had opened up to her, because in this world there was no one more reliable than him. Meanwhile, in Brunel, they were discussing the fact that the lady from the abandoned building had taken the doctor away. They also talked and heard that everything there was arranged like a military shelter. And now the light is on in the mansion, apparently they survived, and what if they capture this fortress? Knox was on the edge of sleep and reality. He was again with the man who was buried under the stones. He begged the doctor to save him because his daughter was waiting at home and suddenly something happened to her. But the doctor knew that this man could not be saved. His injuries were too serious. So he told the man that everything was fine, that his daughter was alive and well, that it was just a dream and everything would be fine. It was just a nightmare that ended. Ludfortia opened his eyes. He was lying in bed. The linen was soft and gentle to the touch. The state was strange. Sleep had not yet left him, and therefore everything seemed unreal. He thought that he had probably lost consciousness, and now did not understand where he was. However, consciousness gradually returned, and with it came memories. It turned out that they had finally made it. He so wanted to believe that it was just a dream. How else could he explain what was happening? He could not imagine that the world had come to an end. Stopping at the door, Knox's gaze naturally shifted to the landscape. He looked at something that looked like a vegetable garden, and a scarecrow and a woman nearby caught his eye. It was definitely Cherry. He didn't expect to see any other woman here. She loudly ordered the scarecrow to take his duties seriously. Thinking that Cherry would always find something to do, I wondered what she was up to. Lately, it increasingly seemed to him that there was a clear purpose behind her oddities. The first time he saw her was only a glimpse, during his sister's wedding to Harrison. This girl immediately caught his eye, and he remembered her ringing laugh. Already at that time, various rumors were circulating about her, but he did not attach any importance to them. Cherry asked the scarecrow to listen carefully because she was giving him an important task. And this is the place he is obliged to protect most of all, and she asked him to remember this well. She asked that this part be especially well guarded because this is the heart of the garden. Knox frowned. It was nothing more than the place where the elfinous herb was planted. Why is she following her so closely? Maybe she knows something that he doesn't. However, he was very suspicious of the place where the plant was found. Here Eden found him. He said that since the doc was conscious, he should go to bed. And he rests, and doesn't wander around wherever he wants. He's already tired of looking for him all over the house. Eden concluded that the temperature had dropped, and Knox asked how long he had been unconscious. Having learned that it was daytime, he said that he was interested because what had happened seemed like a dream. Lancaster replied that he was glad to wake up because there are monsters roaming everywhere, and they are here. And thanks to Miss Cherry's efforts, it is a surprisingly well-fortified mansion. When Ludforshire asked how she was, Eden replied that there were no injuries, which meant she was fine. But the doc meant morally she is still young, and yet she is holding up so well. And this is more surprising than normal, so Lancaster suggested going and checking. Ludforshire, throwing up his hands, said that, unfortunately, psychology is not his specialty. Eden insisted that since he was a doctor, he should take care of her. She had saved his life. It was late at night when she was bothered by the monsters. They were making too much noise outside the gate. She thought that they usually didn't act so excited when there was no victim around. The noise made her feel uneasy, and Lancaster came over to check. When he asked her what she was doing there, she replied that she heard a crash and came down. They discussed the doctor's condition, and Eden added that he had brought him some water, as she had asked. Cherry clarified that he at least thought to bring boiled water. He replied that he was not an idiot. Then she teased him that if he had his way, he would have beaten Ludforshire with sticks. Having replied that he didn't treat sick people that way, he said that he was going to the capital. She knew it had to happen, otherwise she would have taken him there personally. Moreover, she herself saw that he could survive without her, so she had no reason to dissuade him. In addition, his blood contains an antidote to the virus, and he knows how to fight monsters. There was nothing to worry about, and, as the main character of the novel, he should be in the capital. Quite unexpectedly, he said that she had promised that she would protect him. She looked at him, blinking her eyes in surprise at what he was saying. Then I remembered that yes, there had been such a conversation, but back then everything was a little different. She said out loud that he himself had made the decision to leave, and she respected his choice. But he seemed not to hear her words. His whole appearance showed his displeasure. There weren't many nice things in this world today, like a sweet home. And, of course, a tasty and nutritious lunch, preferably at the usual time. In these hellish times, simple things like these keep the psyche stable. However, such an oppressive atmosphere at the table drove our heroine crazy. Eden gave her a whole scandal and got upset only because she didn't stop him. She would never have thought that Eden Lancaster could be such a hysteric. Knox made small talk, saying he didn't think he'd be eating home-cooked food. He continued that, thanks to Miss Cherry's efforts, his fears had not been justified. She agreed and added that during times like these, healthy sleep and nutrition are very important. Knox said the table setting was done well, as if she had done it before. Then he suddenly said that maybe things were worse in the Sinclair family than they seemed. Clenching her fist, she said that he had misunderstood everything and that it would be better for him to continue eating. To smooth things over a bit, Eden decided to take it easy on her for a while. So when Knox asked where Miss was, he replied that he had let her go for a walk. Eden asked the doctor what his impressions were and if everything was okay with her. He replied that, contrary to their fears, everything was fine and he had a guess. If her psyche was weak, she would have broken down long ago and they would have noticed it. Knox added that in this sense, Cherry is much tougher than they might imagine. Eden then said that he was glad if that was the case, but he was concerned about her physical condition. She herself understood that she was working too much, that so many things had to be done in one day. I cleaned up the mansion, cleared out the ashes, and planted the seedlings that I hadn't had time to do before. Half a day flew by like this, and she thought that even at such a time she had to work. Cherry didn't even notice that she said it out loud, so Eden asked why she was straining herself so much. Without thinking, Miss replied that, of course, for a comfortable life. The men exchanged glances, and she was already asking how Eden was going to leave. He asked nothing had changed, maybe they were attracted by the human scent. But she strongly doubted it. Because of the stone walls, the monsters would hardly sense them. So she didn't understand why the monsters outside continued to go berserk. Lancaster said he would wait until there were fewer monsters and find a way to get out. Then he asked if he could stay in the mansion for now, and she, of course, agreed. She wondered if Ludforshire was going to join the expedition with Eden. Knox replied that it would be better if he stayed, but if she wanted, he would follow him to the capital. Eden was not happy with this arrangement, and he objected, saying that he did not need any interference. Thinking she needed specialists, she said she would be glad if the doctor stayed. Out of joy, he even asked again if she would really allow him to stay in the mansion. Then I caught myself thinking about why he was so happy, like a little child. Cherry even offered Knox to take over Lancaster's room when he left. After all, it will be just the two of them, and she believes that it will be much safer that way. He didn't quite understand her. Then she explained that in case of danger, they would be closer. It made sense, and Knox thought, there's nothing wrong with that. He's not a threat to her. At that moment, Eden started making a fuss, asking why she was changing everything. That room was his. And if she gives Knox his rightful place, he will be deeply offended. Angrily, she replied that he didn't have to leave if he was so worried about it. Eden said he felt hurt after everything they had been through together. In Brunel itself, the debate continued, and the man said that they just had to ask. The lady from the abandoned building is unlikely to refuse to help them, even if the risk is high. The girl thought, what idiocy. At first they cursed this lady with all their might. And now they suddenly decided to ask for help, as if they were old and good friends. But one man still insisted that the fortress had to be stormed. From her corner, the girl said that it was not good to provoke others, and if she wanted to, let her go. The man, of course, got angry and shouted that he would teach her to respect her elders. And although they stood up for her, the man stood his ground because he wasn't trying for himself. He asked everyone how long they would continue to hide here and shake with fear. The woman said that the mansion has a legal owner and it would be better to ask. Someone said that they might get rejected, but she is young and alone, and there are many of them here. They started talking about how she took what she needed from the city and that it was all now in the mansion. The girl thought that this was wrong because Miss bought everything with her own money. The lady didn't steal anything, so most likely the aunt is right and we need to ask for help. With these thoughts, the little heroine decided to try her luck and quietly slipped away. Our heroine has already made it a habit to climb the observation tower. She watched the situation, looking out to see if Harrison would finally appear. He should have already reached his happy home. Surely something had happened. She could only hope that he was okay, otherwise he would definitely show up. For Howard, she always came first, until he got married. Cherry wasn't upset that she was pushed into the background. She couldn't be upset with Isabella. True, she didn't know then that Harrison's wife was the sister of a character in the novella. Now they had become suddenly and closely connected with Knox, and that was when he appeared. Unable to contain herself, she told him that it was a coincidence that she had just been thinking about him. When he asked her why, she replied that she was actually remembering his sister Isabella. He darkened in an instant, which means, contrary to rumors, he is not that close to his family. Cherry asked that he apparently couldn't bear the thought of his sister getting married. Knox replied that nothing of the sort had happened and asked them not to look at him so frighteningly. The reason is different. They are indeed related to Isabella, but only on paper. That's why he can't call them a real family. Cherry has become all ears. She was so curious that she asked him what he meant by that. Doc replied that his brothers and sister were biological children, unlike him. The current Marquess and Marchioness of Ludforshire killed his parents and took the title. More precisely, his adoptive father, who is his uncle, poisoned his real father. Things were incredibly complicated, and she felt embarrassed hearing such delicate things. Knox then went into detail, telling the story of how he was 3 years old when his father died from poisoning. The Marquis and Marchioness took him in and raised him, providing him with everything except love. He only learned the truth when he was 15 years old. A distant relative told him about it. But what is most surprising is that Knox Ludforshire felt nothing when he learned the truth. Doc said that he doesn't remember his parents, so he has no desire for revenge. He didn't feel love as such, and it would be stupid to be angry about its absence. When she asked him why he didn't care about his family, he replied that he wasn't angry with them. Then he asked her not to feel sorry for him. Cherry replied that she had no intention of doing so. Having risen, he suggested that they go down because it wouldn't hurt for her to rest. When our heroine tried to get up, her head started spinning and her body felt heavy. The last thing she remembered was her body swaying and she slowly falling. Perhaps it was inspired by Knox's story. She dreamed of that reception where she was ignored. She was not a noblewoman, and upset she asked her mother why they were commoners. The mother replied that even if they had bought the title, they would not have become real aristocrats. And she asked them to remember one thing, that for them she was the most noble and beautiful daughter. Cherry didn't realize then how much her words hurt them. It was like she had stabbed them with a knife. That day they were gone, and after that she no longer wanted to become a noblewoman. Over time she realized that the Sinclairs had something more, and she didn't need titles. She became a star of high society, and all the aristocrats envied and admired her. Cherry had a high fever. Even in her sleep she frowned and moaned, as if she were having a nightmare. She moved as if she was looking for something, and Lancaster involuntarily took her hand. Listening closely, he made out her quiet request. She was asking someone not to leave. Her restless movements ceased, and she seemed to calm down, finding peace. He was confused. Seeing Cherry so defenseless was unexpected even for him. She lay there in a daze, staring at the ceiling and blinking, trying to figure out what had happened. She remembered how Knox told her his heart-rending story that morning. Turning her head, she saw a man sitting in a chair, or rather it was Eden. He fell asleep with his arms crossed over his chest, and how handsome he looked when he was sleeping. Knox was also sleeping peacefully in the chair on the other side, a damp towel in his hand. She thought that this one looked as if he had come to collect an anamnesis from a patient. The two men on either side of her looked like guards watching over the bed. By association, I imagined a watchdog with a cat and involuntarily burst out laughing. Eden was the first to wake up and checked his temperature. She asked how long she had been lying down. When she tried to get up, the awakened doctor told her to stay in bed. Then he added that this fainting was a consequence of heavy workload, so rest was needed. Eden supported Knox, and she joked that she now had both a mum and a dad. He started to say that she shouldn't worry about herself at all when screams were heard from the street. Someone shouted that they knew they were in the mansion and asked them to open the door and provide help. Brunel's young heroine arrived safely at Cherry's happy home. The inhabitants of the mansion looked at the guest and still did not know what to do. The girl smiled sweetly at them, but it is necessary to tell how events unfolded. Cherry commanded that someone needed to climb up and see what was going on. Before she could finish speaking, Eden had already climbed up to the observation tower. A picture appeared before his eyes, a very young girl screaming for someone to save her. The officer announced loudly that it was a child, and Cherry decided she had to help. She asked Eden to give her a signal so she could quickly get out of the gate. Having received the signal, our heroine opened the gate and saw an amazing sight there. A girl of about 15 jumped on the monsters, waving a kitchen knife. Cherry noticed that she moved so quickly and dexterously, like a flying squirrel. She then kicked the monster that had rushed towards the girl's back and swung her axe at another. Brandishing her weapon, Cherry dealt with another one and cleared a path inside. The girl, who had just been flying through the air, landed lightly on her feet and turned around. Everyone looked in confusion at the girl who was sitting on the ground, breathing heavily. Having thanked them for saving her, the young lady asked if she would be allowed to stay with them. Eden asked permission to question her and then check for bite marks. Osaba, calling Eden handsome, said she was terribly allergic to police officers. The officer bristled and asked why she had sinned so much, judging by her intolerance. Knox surprisingly agreed with Lancaster, but Cherry couldn't throw the child out. That's why she said that first she needed to check her condition and then decide. Cherry mentally agreed with the men's reasonable arguments and did not argue. She told the girl that she would tie her up for a while, and if everything was okay, she would untie her. When asked who she was, she replied that she was Amy Wharton, and they could call her Amy. Then Eden asked her what had brought her there, and she began her story. That she was hiding on the second floor of the hotel when she saw her sister dragging the doctor. Then, along with other survivors, she noticed a light come on in the abandoned house. Amy said that the townspeople were discussing a plan to seize the place, and she ran away, frightened by this. Cherry asked why they were capturing her, and the girl replied that it was safest here. Miss Sinclair was angered by the fact that the survivors were also raiding her supplies. But Amy didn't know when the raid was planned because she left before the date was set. Like a true officer, Eden immediately noticed that chaos reigned among the townspeople. So he suggested making a simple plan, but Cherry thought a little differently. And then she was completely against the fact that she was considered a fucking superhero. Knox asked what she intended to do and was willing to listen. She said that she really wanted to just survive here quietly and peacefully alone. But she is not going to sit idly by while they try to take her mansion away from her, adding that they knew the hell she had to go through to create the shelter. Eden replied that he had personally witnessed how the place was drenched in sweat and blood. Knox added that now she is not an heiress, but a warrior in shining armor. Amy said she heard that her sister was quite a famous person in the capital. When she asked what else the lady was capable of, Knox replied that she could buy 100 such mansions. And she will still have pocket money left over because she is the richest girl in this country. The young lady crept up to Cherry and asked her to take her as someone, at least to wash her feet. Sinclair replied that this was not necessary, so Amy began asking to be a servant. With bitterness in her voice, our heroine said that she had only one servant. Eden said nothing, but he remembered how she had experienced her loss that day. Changing the subject, he asked how many survivors were planning to capture them. Amy listed everyone's names, and there were only about 8 of them. Our heroine figured that this included women, which meant there wouldn't be any problems. Getting here is a difficult task, and then there are the townspeople who do not own weapons. If they start to worry now, they won't be able to withstand the main attack. Compared to the shelters of Prince Lloyd and Crown Prince Theodore, these poor guys are a snack. Looking at her comrades, she asked if it was time for them to come up with a plan. The girl begged to go with them. She also wanted to take part in this excursion. Eden asked incredulously if she had ever held a weapon in her hands to be so eager. Amy replied that she had once been a master of pruning shears. And she's also quite clever, but Cherry put a stop to these conversations. They don't take children. The young lady said that it might be useful to them and took the plant out of her pocket. Our heroine looked at the palm of her hand and thought that it looked very much like Elphinus. Then Amy said that she noticed that the monsters were stuck to the gate and sniffing something. After taking a closer look, I realized there was something there, so I took it with me when we went in. Then Cherry remembered the time her bag got caught on the gate. Apparently, then the medicinal herb spilled out of the box, and it turns out that Amy's words are true. Having asked the miss whether this herb was important, she added that it was the one that was mistaken for a drug. She also said that this grass is difficult to care for, but it is characterized by rapid growth. And if she is given the opportunity to look after this plant, she will be able to grow it. Knox said he was already doing that, and Amy replied that she was an herbalist. Then the girl asked to speak, and which of the two was her beloved. When everyone had splashed, she explained that she didn't want to accidentally get into a love triangle. She said that she was a single girl and was not in any kind of relationship with anyone. Looking at the men, I thought that they already have a hard time getting along, so what love can there be? Meanwhile, in the city, Auntie was still worried about Amy. She was almost a child. Watching the mansion, her husband replied that the girl was much better than many of them. He thought that what the others said was right. It was safer in that abandoned house. But it's still better not to take it by force. It's wiser to ask them to let you stay there. I figured that the first priority was to get there safe and sound. The plan of the heroes in the Happy House was quite simple. They just had to fight back. Our heroine's warlike appearance caused a mixed reaction among others. They were not indifferent, and she asked if this amount would be enough for them. Eden replied that this should be enough to wipe out an entire village. He added that the fact that all of this was prepared in advance makes him very wary. Changing the subject, Cherry said that they still lacked a lot of things and needed to stock up. Then she shouted that she was angry because they were bastards and immediately decided to attack. Knox commented that in moments of decline, people turn into evil creatures. Eden picked up on the idea that perhaps the survivors decided that stealing was more honest than begging. Cherry was losing faith in humanity, but there were good people around, and that gave her hope. The men each expressed their own opinion on how one could even think of going to war against her. She thought that if they weren't there, she would still be grieving over Suzanne. She asked out loud, "Everyone understands that in order to stay here, you have to work for two." Knox quickly said that he would then go and look after the plants. Amy, catching up with the doctor, said that she could do this with him too. He retorted that he was the first to volunteer, and if she didn't believe him, she could ask. Cherry turned to Eden, saying that he seemed to be eager to get to the capital to see his sister. He replied that he would stay in the mansion until he was sure that she was okay. To her reply that everything was definitely fine with her, he took a stance and said that not everything was normal. She cursed and said that she knew her body better than some guy from the outside. Ignoring the barb, Eden explained that she relied too much on force. And if he is not here, then who will protect her? A group of invaders is approaching. Then she asked to go look for her sister after resolving current matters. Lancaster reluctantly agreed, but then said that when he found Aurora, he would return. Cherry replied that if he didn't find it, then he should come back, but if he did find it, then there was no need. And she thought that he wanted to repay her for saving her, but she had already received enough. She said out loud that if he wanted to repay her, then it would be enough for her that he survived. At that moment, sounds came from afar, as if monsters were causing a commotion. Our heroine asked to postpone all conversations until later. Uninvited guests arrived. The destroyed world reveals the rotten essence of man, and it is visible as if in the palm of your hand. Cherry always thought that such pompous words existed only on the pages of books. Now that everyone had climbed up to the observation tower, she could see how shocking it was. Near the wall, people were visible, surrounded by monsters. They were fighting back with the means at their disposal. In front of them on the ground lay 3 people. All of the dead seemed to be already dead. Amy said that these freaks used the corpses of their own comrades as bait. Eden pointed out that all those who died were weak people who had found it difficult to fight. Such abomination overwhelmed her with disgust for people, and she couldn't help but cover her mouth. Knox asked what they would do. Cherry couldn't answer. Then Eden spoke. He asked to speak, and he will make it so that the townspeople will not even be able to set foot on the threshold. The doctor added that this time he fully supported Lancaster's idea. Amy also put in her 2 cents, then Cherry said that there was no need to get her hands dirty. And if you think about it sensibly, they just need to strengthen the defences of the mansion, that's all. The real problem is elsewhere, in the horde of monsters they brought with them. Eden said irritably that in this situation it would be better to go out and destroy the monsters. Then Knox said that this way they could get rid of both the monsters and the city dwellers. And Amy gave a negative opinion. There are only 4 of them, and how will they cope? However, the doctor believed that the 4 of them could achieve a lot with a good strategy. After all, Lancaster is a genius at fencing and shooting, and Miss Cherry has incredible strength. At that moment, human screams were heard from outside, apparently from one of the townspeople. One of the residents, surrounded by monsters, screamed, and the man behind her grabbed her. The people in the mansion stopped all conversation because a nightmare was beginning downstairs. Cherry watched the situation closely. What she saw was inhumane. Seeing the monsters tearing apart the thrown corpse, the survivors backed away in fear. Words were heard that he was no better than monsters, since he did this to a living person. The big man replied that he wanted to live, and the others were alive only thanks to him. There was a clear split in the ranks of the townspeople, although not all the words could be made out. But for the inhabitants of the Happy House, their behavior spoke louder than words. Another man yelled at Jackson that they were going to beg the owner to let them in. The same one, pointing to the wall, shouted that it was impossible to cling to this stupid hope. He shouted that these scum were looking down on them, and that bitch probably thought she was a goddess. They told him that it was he who had stormed the house and was going to take away both her life and the mansion. Cherry thought that he would kill her without a second thought. Such bastards have no right to life. Eden sensed her mood, and he didn't want her soul to become hardened. Covering her ears, he told her that it would be better for her not to listen to all this nonsense of that madman. Then he continued, so that she would not let these words tarnish her soul. Our heroine realized that it worked. If it weren't for Eden, she would have shot at everyone. I thought that I shouldn't stoop to murder, no matter how disgusting the enemy. She looked gratefully at Eden, who managed to stop her in time. As an officer, he took command and sent Knox and the girl to open the gate. They were incredibly surprised. Amy even asked if they really wanted to help the scum. But Cherry replied that it was not for their sake, but for her own, so as not to be tormented by feelings of guilt. If she decided to help these people down below, she had to do it properly. Besides, they didn't have time to indulge in emotions. The monsters were growing in number. After a short thought, Miss said she could go down alone. Eden quickly replied that he would cover her and let him go ahead and show the way. Then he added very quietly that this is precisely why he still can't leave. Smiling, our heroine thought that one way or another he was still going with her. 2 townspeople outside the wall found themselves surrounded by monsters, their lives hanging by a thread. They carefully closed their eyes, and then a police uniform came into their field of vision. With one blow, he cut through the crowd of monsters, swung his sword, and slime splashed onto the ground. The townspeople heard his words. He shouted to them to hurry out the gate. The woman looked with admiration at Cherry, who cut down the monsters without hesitation. The overwhelming force caused even the monsters to eventually instinctively retreat. Emma remembered her first impressions of this miss. She noted that she was beautiful. Cute and adorable to look at, as if it were actually made of star-shaped candies. A visiting girl with a good sense of style, who dresses as she wishes. Then rumours reached her that Miss was buying up a bunch of things from different stores. And he keeps them in his abandoned mansion, but Emma didn't pay any attention to it at the time. Then hell broke loose on Earth, monsters appeared, and the survivors hid in a hotel. There she learned the name of a girl whose fame outshines that of any aristocrat. Now Emma knew that this was the heiress of the richest family, Lady Cherry Sinclair. She thought it was simply incredible how such power could come from such a fragile body. I wondered where such power came from that monsters die from one blow. It was as if they were from completely different worlds. Her husband's voice distracted her from her thoughts. He said that things were bad. It seemed that the lady couldn't fight at full strength because of them. Emma realized that Cherry was afraid for them and decided to offer her husband a way out. Cherry didn't know what to do either. It was hard to fight and protect those 2. Out of the corner of my eye, I glanced at Eden and realized that he was in a similar situation. I thought maybe I should try to rush to the mansion because there had to be some way out. At that moment, a shot rang out, and Eden even froze with his sword at the ready, puzzled. The elegantly dressed man, although rather shabby, looked noble. The trio arrived just in time. The man lowered his gun and smiled. His eyes quickly found Cherry, and his smile widened. It was Howard Harrison. He said that he had finally reached his only and dear sister. Our heroine, overwhelmed with joy, threw herself into his arms, and he hugged her back. Cherry quietly said that she always knew he was alive. He replied that he was so worried about her. Quickly examining his clothes, Miss asked if he was injured and continued to chatter. When he asked her what she must have had a hard time of it, she said that was an understatement. Harrison asked her not to be angry that he was late, but Suzanne was looking after her. Then he asked where she was. Inside the mansion, Cherry muttered something incoherently in response. She couldn't even pronounce her name. Harrison's face turned to stone as he looked at her. Then Cherry was able to mumble about the monster, and that she had to do it with her own hands. Soon a large hand stroked her head, and he said that it was not her fault. Then, in a gentle voice, he thanked the young lady for being able to hold out for so long. It was only when she heard a slight cough that Cherry realized they weren't alone. Harrison was about to tell everything, but our heroine didn't let anyone get a word in edgewise. She greeted Vanilla and was surprised to notice that they seemed to know each other. Miss Ruskin smiled and said that it was a long story and would be told later. Then the pink-haired youth opened his mouth and asked if the lady really lived in this abandoned house. Our heroine wondered who it was, noting that he was younger than her and also handsome. The young man said he was glad to meet her. His name was Jose Cambrol, and he had heard a lot about her. He added that on the way here they told her that she was raised like a real princess. She shook his hand awkwardly, but his name somehow seemed familiar. After repeating his name several times, she realized that she knew this guy. It was that same Jose Cambron, one of the candidates for the main male characters. In the original novel, he was also known as an unrivaled weapons expert. It turns out that on that day, Harrison offered her this very young man as a teacher. However, it now turned out that Eden, Knox, Vanilla, and Jose were in her hideout. The main characters gathered in a happy home. She ruined the whole plot. She was distracted from her thoughts by Emma, who came up to thank her for saving their lives. Then they bowed, looked at everything in turn, and repeated the words of gratitude. Tears streamed down the woman's cheeks as she asked how they could repay. Amy replied that now she and her uncle had no choice but to be loyal. After these words, silence reigned in the courtyard, and everyone looked at the young lady. Eden broke the silence and asked not to listen to this idiot, but to rest instead. Then he added that there were a lot of people here who dreamed of inundating her with their questions. Since he looked suspiciously at Jose at that moment, the latter was even surprised. Cherry took the reins and invited everyone to go inside and rest.